whatever the default setting is. Should be good. Okay. All right. So yeah, it's our August AMC meeting. Yeah. Yeah. It'll just be the normal. Oh, all right. So we're going to start out with attendance. I'll just actually just mark you guys off. Seth Barnes.
Present in person.
All right. David Bunny.
Present by video.
Adam Coble.
Present by video.
Stacy Detweiler. Courtney Zambori as proxy for Truly Furman.
Present in person.
Wendy Gerlach.
Present in person.
Kim Kratz.
Present virtually.
Sikula.
Present in person.
Jason Robeson.
Present virtually.
Josh Teets.
Present in person.
All right, Rick Storm as proxy for Amanda Sullivan-Astor. He'll probably join us later. William Tucker.
Present in person.
Right. I think that's it. All right, so agenda for today, it's pretty standard. We're gonna be doing some updates. We are adding something to the agenda where we do work group report outs. Essentially, the two work groups that I know that have been doing work are the effectiveness monitoring strategies work group and the field trip work group. So we'll get some updates from them. Then we're going to be brainstorming amphibians, questions, and focus. I know Jennifer Weichel this morning had some ideas. I put them on one of the amphibian slides for brainstorming just to get us started. Oh yeah, sorry. And then we'll of course look at our executive summary. I forgot that part before the brainstorm. And we're going to discuss the IRST honed Eastern Oregon Steep Slopes questions. This is more of a, hey, they approved exactly what we said at that moment. So I don't know if we still vote on that, and that's a substantial decision. Because it's interesting because like it's not really IRST honed because they're like, yeah, that sounds great, but I'll bring the letter up and we can still for posterity, have a vote on there to make sure that's okay.
We might not need to vote, but we'll at least discuss it.
Discuss, yeah. Okay, great. And we'll discuss in their letter when they said that that scoping proposal will be done by. And then we will discuss the process for new research questions, prioritizing research questions. All right, as you know, meetings are public and recorded instead of minutes, and they're available online. We have started putting the executive summaries up after they've been approved. So there's a bit of a lag on that on the website, but you'll see the ones that have all been approved by the AMC. Let's be Rex. I'm Emily. Okay. Please turn your camera on if you're with us virtually. It helps with discussion. I will exit out of I'll exit out of this so everyone can see you when we're discussing things. And please mute when not speaking. Now is a moment. Would anyone like to speak for public comment? One thing that I just want to make everyone aware of is I did have the wrong version up of the prioritization document. Julie Vondercheck from our PR was able to get it up this morning on the website, so everyone should still have access to it who's not in this room. But yeah, I just wanted to apologize for that. So anyone have a comment? All right. Keep moving on then. All right, so I'm going to actually bring up the executive summary from the previous meeting. did anyone have any changes they like to suggest or anything before it's approved? Tell me when you want me to scroll down.
Go ahead and scroll down.
We have added the exact motion in there, yeah, so that'll help with records keeping, so. Yeah.
Any comments on the agenda? We don't take a vote on this, remember, it's just more.
Oh, yeah, it's just motion.
Thumbs up.
Yeah.
Thank you. Looks good.
All right, great, so that has been approved. Point here.
Just so it's clear for the public, the formal minutes for our meetings are actually the recordings. We do those executive summaries as more of an opportunity for, you know, in the future, as people are searching back to see which meeting had discussed this or that, you know, for historical purposes, those executive summaries will help you, so you don't have to sit there and listen to the entire meeting or watch it to determine whether that item was discussed or voted on. So it kind of just pulls out highlights that they have.
Our clip notes of
Yeah,
word.
yeah. So it's super helpful.
Great, so time for some updates. So as I've already said, the Eastern Oregon Steep Slopes Research Questions Package, no changes were made by IRC. So also just keep everybody aware, there's a board forestry meeting coming up the first week of September, which I guess is next week, the 4th through the 5th. So there are some.
It is next week.
Yeah, so just to put that on your radar.
Maybe if we could pause there for a second. One thing that Stacy and I probably should have communicated with you, and it would probably be wise just to interject this in here. There are some budget issues that are going on, EFA wise that are wide, that also affected the work of the adaptive management program. I don't want to set off an alarm, just to say that as it sits right now, the you know, we don't have the governor's recommended budget yet, but what we've been told is that in the department's budget that they put together, the work of this committee is not in the formal budget. And they were told, they were directed not to include it in a pot either. And so the governor's office is very aware that of this work and the priority, the high priority that this work is. And in discussions that you know, Stacy and I and Casey have had with the governor's office, we've been told that they will be, you know, looking to fund this program, as well as the mitigation program and the S-fish program. But you know, that's a lot of money, relatively speaking, to be able to find from other places to be able to make whole. And so there's we're a bit nervous that there's not a solid plan that we're aware of to continue, you know, the high level of funding that's necessary. And so the authors, the PFA authors, the small forest landowners, the environmental community and the timber industry have gotten together to strategize around, you know, just making sure that legislators are aware of the situation that we're in and the good work that's been occurring under the PFA, including the mitigation or the mitigation and the adaptive management program, and basically sort of make a pitch that those folks prioritize this work for funding. So in the end, it doesn't really matter, you know, it does matter what the governor's recommended budget is, but at the end of the day, ultimately it's what passes through the legislature. So we just want to make sure that we shine a light on this. So we'll be testifying at the upcoming legislative days. Stacy and myself and somebody representing the small woodland owners. There may be some changes to that in terms of personnel, but the message is going to be pretty clear. Just that PFA wide, a lot of good work is happening, and please continue to prioritize this for funding. So,
Yeah, and that recommended budget is gonna be coming out in December, the governor's recommended budget, just to keep you all aware of that. Yeah, I did talk with Kyle this morning about it. He's been off on a fire, but he made me aware.
Yeah.
But yeah, just so that you all know, it's because like there's only so many POPs that can be prioritized in the agency. It's not that it's not considered a priority, but just need to get the funds somehow.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then
Well, and to be fair, I don't want to make it sound like the governor's office also wasn't supportive. They
oh, yeah.
definitely were. It's just that right now there's no solid, this is how the funding is coming. And so in the absence of that, we just need to, continue to do our best to make sure people understand the priority that we feel anyway, and of course, the legislature has to balance that with everything else that's priorities. I get that. But we're gonna do our best to make that pitch.
Yeah, and I mean, something with the adaptive management program that I'm sure you all are pretty aware of, but just for the public's sake as well. We get to what we don't use in the first biennium doesn't go away like with most like ODF programs. It's rolled over to the housing agency, the Institute for Natural Resources through OSU. So we get to still have access to that money. So, if there's leftover, it's not just going to go away. So that helps too, having that money. We know we have it no matter what, the 4 million. So, but yes, we will need more money in the future, but it is nice to, think about that. Okay, and then
Yeah, Wendy's got her.
oh yes.
Figures. Thanks.
Just gonna say, you didn't specifically mention the IRSP, and that really concerns me because we're asking them to kick off work, and our effectiveness monitoring committee work really is saying, can you come put together a proposal for a really significant piece of work? So that's something that seems quite timely as well.
Well, I guess when I say adaptive management program, I mean IRS.
Just worried. I was probably
No, it's all encompassing.
Yes, and then also, are we ready to move on from that part of the update?
Let's see. Courtney, I don't want you to leave Courtney out of this. Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife mitigation work also isn't through the PFA grant program also isn't.
Yeah, so we'll be pitching for that too. Yeah.
And I actually don't know about the EQ system.
Yeah, I mean, if we don't have a direct stake, like funding wise in the PFA, but we've had some given for our policy options. So for us, the programs, which are actually mainly in quality, that greenhouse gases, especially populated areas, giving a lot of attention and push on the air quality side. I think the rest of us have been sort of don't be asking for a lot this year. So I think I'm wanted to take that a little bit.
Thank you.
And Casey, can you speak at the commission meeting about this? So
Yeah.
they were aware.
I mean, they know, but
Yeah.
sometimes commissioners don't necessarily know what their role is.
And I did mention it
Sometimes
as well.
don't know things.
Now that you say that, thanks for bringing that up, Courtney, because I had a call last week with the Board of Forestry Chair Jim Kelly, and I made sure he was aware that we were going to be pushing for this. And actually, he mentioned that they might be willing to, the board that is, might be willing to send a letter of support as well. So we can follow up with that, but doesn't hurt.
Senate Natural Resources would like this being
Okay, all right, we can talk.
So on that note, so the Board of Forestry sending a lot of things, especially like efficient passage and small efforts to build and stuff it's very important for water quality and priorities. So is that something that do you think it would be helpful for TEQ? I would guess probably the division administrator.
Yeah, it doesn't hurt. That would be great. Absolutely.
I think.
Yeah, let's follow up.
Yeah, okay, let's follow up on that.
Yeah.
I didn't know be able to
Okay.
on the DEQ end because I do think it's hugely important to
Yeah.
have the incentives for small forest landowners, because that
Yeah, sorry for derailing. We probably should have made sure that was on the agenda already. I just, in the beginning, I thought, shoot, we should probably make sure everybody's aware, so they're not, either you guys don't, see Stacy and I, presenting at a, at the legislative days and like, what? I didn't know that was happening.
I mean, that's great, because it was on I put it on the updates for myself to say something, but you have more, skin in the game with that, so you probably could do a better job with that update, so thank
I don't
you.
know, Stacy, if you have any more to add.
Before it, I mean, almost hit on, not only on this important committee and then, yeah, the rules, but also getting federally approved HCP for still really like, and it needs to still get across the finish line space, so that's at least where we can make regular housing.
And that's actually the perfect segue into another update I had just about like the HCP. Most of you are probably aware, but it in its entirety, including chapter 5, was submitted July 15th, and there's a 90-day turnaround expected from the services. July 15th. And there's a 90-day turnaround. On it. So.
And just so everyone's aware that the document that was submitted is not made public yet. It's a first draft that then the services will comment. There's likely going to be some small edit changes that will need to be taken care of, and so the group of the authors with the department are going to doing some of those tweakings. I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, others who might know, but I believe the public document will be made available sometime, probably likely around the end of the year, first of the year next year, something like that. That's my understanding.
But we're talking tomorrow morning, so
We'll get more clarity, but
we're having trouble. Online folks are not being able to hear.
Okay.
They're it's cutting in and out. So
I wonder if we should do that speaking. Basically speaking, since there's more of us online than used to be.
Oh.
Yeah, I was having trouble hearing Stacy and Josh. I just was wondering, I don't know if there's a speaker that's.
We can project.
The speaker is up here, so yeah, maybe we can just.
So Josh was just saying that he might be able to help coordinate a letter from DEQ that would be in support of, especially particularly the SFISH program and funding continuing funding for that.
Okay.
And so we'll follow up there.
Okay, great, thanks.
And Adam or anyone else online, let me know if there is audio issues later.
Yeah, this is Dave. I can definitely hear Emily and you really well and Seth very well, but the other folks are iffy for me.
Yeah, because the speaker is at the front, so maybe if we're speaking that way, maybe the speakers isn't.
Yeah.
It's a new system.
Interesting. That would have been better if they would have put that over here. Right?
Yeah.
Middle of one week room. Oh well. All right, we'll do our best.
So I guess now for the work groups report out, field trip planning, Seth and Casey.
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and start, and then Casey, you can fill in. So just so everybody's aware, we're likely going to have to move off not likely, we will have to move off the date. And I think Emily already sent that out, that date will change. I don't believe we have a solid date yet. So I'll just give you a peek of what I think we're planning here. Dr. Tiffany Garcia at OSU is currently doing research on amphibians on private lands. And she's published several previous studies on amphibians around the state. And so she agreed to take us out with some of her, at least one of her graduate students that's also working on the project with her, and show us one of the sites that they're that's part of the research project, talked about what they're doing, and then fill us in on the other research that she's done, and also help us I think, and I'm looking forward to it because I think it's gonna be a nice dovetail to this discussion today. Where we'll be able to talk about some of the potential questions we have and get a better sense from her and her graduate student how they think that might fit with like stuff that's already known, not known, sites that maybe they already have lined up. And anyway, just sort of help us hone. And we're also looking to invite the IRST to come with us on that field trip so that we can have a robust conversation. And there's certainly members around the IRST that have experience with this with amphibians as well. So I think that will be a really good opportunity for us to interface and just sort of again dovetail with the discussion today and continue a little bit more honed brainstorm session with them and informed as we're out there actually, you know, kicking dirt and looking at sites and talking about results that they found. So hopefully that's enough to sort of whet your appetite that this will be a worthwhile opportunity. The challenge is the date that we had picked doesn't work for Dr. Garcia. And so she was on vacation during that time when we were kind of having a little bit back and forth. And she finally said, I want to do this. I'm excited to do it, but I'll schedule it when I get back. And so now she's back and we're trying to hone in on a date.
I was actually going into that, Casey, since you've talked to her a bit more, when I already poked her a little last week, so I don't want to like send another one.
Totally. I was like, oh, well, I'll see Emily and I'll ask her if I should do it.
Maybe like tomorrow or something if we haven't heard from her.
Well, I think it's a really exciting opportunity to actually see research that's happening on private land, which is what we're, you know, focused on amphibians in Oregon from somebody who's done a lot of research on the topic, or at least a fair amount of research on the topic. So, so that's what we're planning. That's what, you know, I'm sure it will come together. We just need to find a date and then we'll circulate it out to everybody. Hopefully we'll be able to find a date that works for everyone.
And it should be in October, most likely. It did sound like September is actually not as good a time for amphibian activities. So she was like, oh, October or November is better. So I don't know if that'll skew more towards later October, what that looks like. But just a heads up. And also for just the public's info, this is not going to be a public meeting. This is basically a information gathering field trip, so everyone can be more informed about amphibians on the adaptive management program committee and also the independent research and science team. We've invited them as well to join us once we have that.
Yeah, there won't be any decisions made. It's just going to be an exploratory an information gathering, and we'll have robust discussion, I am certain, at our follow-up AMC meeting about what we saw, what we heard, what people's takeaways were. And that should really help us get down the road a little bit further, you know, between today's session and then learning more out there and then coming back together. I feel good about the plan. I think it'll help us move down the road.
All right. Thanks. Yeah, so next up, the effectiveness monitoring strategy work group. I know that consists of Josh, David, Wendy, and Julie, but you know, she's not here right now. Would one of you like to just mention where we're at?
Wendy, looking at me, I'll start.
You start.
And I'll project my voice though. Folks online, hopefully you can hear me. Yeah, so the four of us have gotten together, always facilitation and assistance. We're trying to draft out a request to the IRST for help putting together an effectiveness monitoring strategy, but also trying to structure it so that we're not just sending them a, you know, kind of open-ended, undefined request, but that we're saying this is some of the pieces we're looking for and what we want to be able to do. So some of that is, you know, honing in on what the parameters are and how it might relate to programs that other entities or agencies already have. And some of that is saying is like, you know, specifying that we want to really be paying attention to what's needed to have statistically meaningful, monitoring, given how much background noise there is. We don't want to fall into a sea of type 2 error where we just can't detect any meaningful change because there's not enough density. And let's see, notes up here. Yeah, and then I think probably one of the things you've specified that probably needs to be highlighted more is that we need to be differentiating between the effects of private forest land use and other land uses like public forests or agriculture or residential, because it's the whole point of the PFA and its habitat conservation plan is that it's focused on private forests, so we need to be able to pick out that private forest signal. So it's, I think, actually probably pretty challenging in terms of the design problem, which is I think why we're going to IRST. So I don't know if there was a more recent version, Emily, than what the changes that Julie and I had earlier in the summer. We're supposed to meet again, I think, in early October.
Yeah, October 1st, you guys set up a meeting. And also that's the first day that Terry Free is back. He's aware, so he'll be sitting in on that too. He's like, oh, wow, thanks for telling. I texted him so that he would know. He's like, oh, thanks, because I have no access to my work stuff, so.
But you'll still be with us.
Oh, yeah,
that'll be good overlap.
Yeah, it'll be a good overlap, bring him back around, because for those of you who don't know, I am backfilling for Terry Free as the document management program coordinator. So my term is basically May through October. So just an FYI. All right. So moving on.
Before we get off that one, are you guys to what extent are you using the biological goals and objectives in that discussion? We have a draft of that you've.
Yeah. So it's built around the biological goals and objectives. And part of the question how do we do this? Are we going to try to measure the BGOs directly? Are we going to try to measure water quality parameters that influence the BGOs? And that's part of the question. But yeah, it's definitely centered around the biological goals and objectives with what are we already doing in state government that gets to this that we can build upon, what's already happening in academia that we can build upon, rather than trying to build it necessarily like from the ground up, a whole new program that might repeat things that other programs are already doing, which seems even more relevant now with you bringing up the funding concerns. And then, we really want to get to how do we structure this so we can say what reliably detect what is a forestry influence versus other land uses, natural background, which is very high. Background variability.
Yeah, the only small things I thought of adding were, well, first of all, Josh and Julie obviously have brought a lot of great technical expertise to how we want to frame this for the IRSD in terms of questions, or the project, in terms of turning the project to them. It will eventually be an IRSD project because the AMPC is just framing it for them and saying how would you, I recall what we're thinking of putting our questions more like, what studies would you look at? And we've in the committee or the working group looked at some examples of effectiveness monitoring for HCPs and other situations. And so we're providing some examples and then asking IRST to think about what approach works best. And that's why in particular, it seemed like a pretty big project, but a really important part of the adaptive management program. So that's why when you mentioned the funding, I was like, wait a minute. We have this in the pipeline, so it will be really important for the funding for IRST to. This is to my mind a little bit of an add-on for IRST because when we talked originally about the role, I don't think we specifically mentioned this job, which I think will be quite a big one. Will be important to fund.
And correct me if I'm wrong. We need to have an effectiveness monitoring plan for that HCP to get approved, and the incident will take permit to be issued. We're on a fairly tight deadline, especially with the speed of federal act.
And it does have to link into the HCP and what it has in there on this topic. So the IRST can't get a hold of that ahead of the public release, I'm assuming, or So that will delay it a little bit, but they can start with some conceptual work, what kind of program is likely to work, what models they might look at that will be effective for this situation.
Yeah, that's a good question, Mindy, and I'm going back to people who, you know, we were deep into HCP drafting 2 months ago, and we're about to jump back into the next steps for it. So I'm going to ask you to remind me, was in there's some point within the BGOs right now where there's a bit of a punting to IRST. Can you remind me of the details of that? I tried to relay them to Wendy earlier and I probably failed.
The BGOs funding to IRST?
Yeah.
I was thinking of statute.
I was like, yes.
Sorry, talking out of turn.
Okay.
I'd have to go back and look at it specifically, Casey, because I don't remember the specifics around it either. Just to say that there was some, in terms of measuring or creating an effective monitoring plan or strategy. There was a couple of them that's basically said, we'll leave it up to the IRST to determine how best to quantify and measure this over time. If I'm remembering, I don't remember exactly.
Yeah, there's a table, I don't remember the details. Some of the BGOs established thresholds in the HCP and some did not, and that's where they would basically be kicked to the IRST because at the time of drafting and for a lot of reasons, that was where we landed with like, we didn't have enough to determine in this process what those metrics should be based on best available science and things. So, yeah.
Jennifer Michael's probably like,
I know,
sorry.
Yes.
But
I just wanted to add super quickly to just as far as interaction with IRST, both Kelly and Jeff, you and IRST were also deeply involved in drafting the HCP, so they have a solid understanding.
They understand that better.
So it may feel a little bit like an add-on, and it's probably for not putting those together as early on because we were focused on the statutorily required things, but they're very much aware of that. So it hopefully won't be too much of a surprise, but the importance of that.
Yeah, thanks. To me, the statute is pretty clear, but I think the statute just says that adaptive management program has to do effectiveness monitoring, and I think there's a reference to IRST there. But I was just thinking in terms of the workload of the IRST, they're only thinking about that too. But then we have that the roads baseline issue too. So that again, it's a big load that we're keying up for the IRST.
We do have a couple comments. We have Jennifer Weichel on here that just says it is the BGO metrics where some people are, identified for IRC work, not the BGOs themselves. Right. Just to, I just wanted to read it off. Okay,
Thank you.
Thanks for keeping that straight for me.
I think between Casey and Stacy and I, we pretty much narrowed in on it.
Awesome. Do you all feel comfortable moving on?
Yeah. Oh, first, thank you. Thanks for working. Appreciate it. It's nice to know it's moving along.
Yeah, so yes, as I mentioned, we've got another meeting in October. And what was the plan for bringing it to the full MC for batting it around?
So I'm guessing, I mean, this is something that I'm sure, Carrie will work with us, but the following meeting, like after that, I think, which might be in December, that might be something that's discussed. Probably will be because we'll be focused on amphibians still, and then most likely, and then this, the effectiveness monitoring strategy.
Yeah, that makes sense to me, is that we would split the focus of that meeting in December between amphibians and effectiveness monitoring. So.
Okay. Right. Yeah, so I guess what's ahead, that kind of segues into that. We're I guess our next meeting is October, 28th. So yeah, discuss amphibians questions. Also be discussing like upcoming AMC member terms and renewals. There's a couple people, it's Amanda Sullivan Astor, Wendy Gerlach, and then Stacy Detweiler for your co-chair position. So that will be something that will be discussed at that meeting as we're nearing the end of the year. And then the effectiveness monitoring strategy. So yeah, there's your answer. All right, so I guess now is kind of just where we go into the amphibians brainstorming. So I'm just gonna bring up a slide that has, right now it just has Jennifer Weichels. I'm gonna actually exit out of this so that I can make notes on the slide. But it has Jennifer Weichels' info on there that she provided in the email, questions that she had going through the HCP process about amphibians. So I guess I'll read them off just to make it a little easier, but basically two potential focuses that we have up here, and of course we're discussing more in this meeting, is amphibian use of oh, Jennifer. Yes, let me see. Yeah, go ahead and talk with us, Jennifer.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. Yeah, I threw this in the email to Seth and Stacy and Emily this morning. It was just something that popped in my head. Obviously, this topic is a big one, a broad one. And just as we've been developing the HCP, there have been some questions that have continued to come up in our conversations that I just wanted to get in front of this group. But I think, as you guys work on this topic, in my mind, it sort of falls into two pieces. One is the general knowledge gap piece, and then the other would be the effectiveness of the rules piece. And the two that are on this slide, in my mind, fall in the general knowledge piece. And these are just two topics that have come up in our conversations as we've worked through specifically our effectiveness analysis chapter. And one is just the extent of use of what's been termed disconnected seeps and springs on the landscape. And those could be seeps and springs that are, adjacent to a non-fish seasonal stream, or even upland and completely disconnected from the stream network. So we really don't have an understanding of amphibian use. And the conversation has come up specific to torrent salamanders, but this would apply to all the covered species. The other one is the extent and also the mechanisms for overland dispersal of these species. So over ridgeline dispersal, I think you guys had a presentation by Dee Dee. There's genetic information to point to the fact that that occurs, but we don't really understand the where and how and when of that. And then the one to add that I thought of after I sent that email, the other piece that's come up is the extent of use or the extent of even just overlap or range occurrence on the east side. The range maps we're using, the analysis show, I think 4 out of the 5 with potential use of habitats on the east side. And we really don't have a good understanding of how often they really occur there, where are they, and then is their habitat use different? And then obviously on the effectiveness piece, to me, the 3 things are, the effectiveness of the forested buffers, the effectiveness of the RELZs specifically for the perennial stream systems, and then the effectiveness of the ELZs on the seasonal. So that's just my high level perspective that I just came up this morning. But I just wanted to get that in front of the group just because these are topics that have been heavily discussed during our HCP development that I feel personally we don't have very good answers for. And it seems like this group would be a good group to take those on.
So you said, just to clarify, sorry, effectiveness of buffers, ELZs,
the R-ELZs are the other piece.
So it's both ELZs and R-ELZs.
Yeah, they're 2 different things. And then the buffers is essentially the no harvest forested buffers.
Okay.
So thank you guys. I appreciate you giving me a couple minutes to share my thoughts.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you, Jennifer.
And just so everybody knows, and then we'll go to Bill. So this is truly a brainstorm. This is truly like, so our thought here was just to, as we've sort of talked about amphibians, and you guys knew amphibians was on the radar and coming up soon. We thought, and then we've had that's it, Dr. Olson and oh, come on. Jessica Homiak, Dr. Homiak, talk about amphibians at our meeting a year ago. It's almost a year ago now. We thought it would probably be useful to get people's thoughts just down on paper, and then we can kind of we'll try to lump them together in some format, maybe manipulative studies versus distribution, sort of population distribution sort of things, or whatever bucket we can put them in. And then that will help us lead into a discussion at the field trip where we're learn a little bit more about those buckets and what we do know and don't know. And then sort of try to tease out what makes sense in what order, because there's a lot we could learn, but certainly there's you gotta have some rhyme to the reason of why we would want to pick this first or that first, and then move to these other things so that it can kind of build in that. So anyway, just wanted to make sure people are aware of what we're doing here. There's no right or wrong thing to say. It's really just what your thoughts are, what you've been thinking in terms of questions that would be valid and useful to know. So with that, Commissioner Tucker.
So the comment about, particularly for the Corinth salamanders, I look at the amphibians as a whole nest of critters. And I think about slender salamanders. I think about the yellow toad, red-legged yellow toad, tree frog. It's one of the things that I deal with on an ongoing basis. And is the Torrent salamander noted here because it is one at risk, particular risk? Is it because it's a parakeet that stands in and says, in a coal mine, if I die, others are going down with me? Why is that one salamander?
It's a good question. The specific species that we want to make sure we hone in on are the species that are listed in the draft HCP. Those are the ones that we're going to be really sort of focused on, because that's what's relevant to the habitat conservation plan, and that's what's prescribed for this committee to focus on in the statute and rules.
So it's not just a Torrent salamander.
It's not. No.
That was my point.
There's multiple. There's the and again, Jennifer has, I'm sure, these species up the tip of her tongue more than I do. But no, it's not the one. I think there's what was there.
I think there's 5.
That's what I was going to say. 5.
Yeah, the Torrent salamander, the southern coastal giant salamander, giant salamander, the coastal tail.
Don't forget. Yeah. Don't get the tail frog.
Yeah. So those are the ones.
So I just I hope that kind of helps with like summarizing that, your thought in the context of the HCP. I mean, it might be helpful to know a little bit of the background as to why they were chosen when we're thinking about what questions to ask. I mean, parts of it, I'm sure, it's because they're not doing as well.
But that could in and of itself could be a question. What do we know about the populations of
Other
of these species? What do we know about their status, trends, distribution, what's known about that?
I think that all of them, except for the giant salamander, don't have an organ sensitive status, but I know the Columbia Torrent salamander is under federal review right now for its change of status. I think it's too endangered. Yeah.
Okay, can you repeat the two? Can you repeat the two that you mentioned? Sorry. Notes. Let's see, the coastal giant salamander, I believe, has no special status. All the others are organ sensitive species, and then the Columbia Torrent salamander is currently in federal review. Okay. I think that would be a really good point, is to highlight why those.
Yeah, and that was one of the ones that I wanted to get on here as well, was just, you know, the general I don't know what the right term is here, demographics or whatever, like population size and distribution. What do we know about? You know, we might not know a lot. We might have a couple of studies that lean one way or another for a given species, but I just would like to know, what do we know about each one of them? You know, and that will help us inform where we go.
Did I get that right? Or is it something besides Oregon torrent salamander? I just, Columbia torrents.
Jason, your hand is up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment. I agree that if we have the baseline on the species that are including the HCP, that'll be helpful for us to kind of identify the scope and scale of the questions. I think that's really important. And then the other question then is, if there is a ranking of those that are what we call maybe more sensitive, then maybe we start with questions that focus on the more sensitive species and work backwards to those that may be less sensitive. So just some comments there.
A good one to capture too. Thanks, Jason. Casey, and then Stacy.
Casey.
Okay.
I just want to add on, because I think that's a great place to start with, what do we know? And I think also maybe the secondary research question, because I think what we may find is we don't know a lot, and that definitely drove some decisions in the process. But trying to do that research around distribution and really understanding their range, their prevalence, like that may be the new research that is needed. And that could be a similar related, but kind of more expansive version of that. Like, help us understand what we know now, and then also how would you design additional research so we can actually understand what these species are.
And then adding to that, really to add this, Casey, adding to Jason's observation is that we know that the rule sets, and going to Jennifer's comments, we know that the rule sets have these no harvest buffers in the lower stream network. And so we also know that amphibians that are in the lower stream network have a different protection now under the conservation measures than upland and upstream into the network. So really, to me, a question as part of the question is, what's the conservation status, the conservation measures and the buffers related to each species, right? Because we may not need to provide a lot of focus, especially in the research agenda, on species that are, 110-foot buffer.
I'd like to add on that, versus salamanders, when they do travel different distances from the stream itself. So maybe a subcategory of that is looking at, more the ranking of most sensitive to least sensitive, but also those that venture further into the forest ecosystem versus those that are regulated to the streams themselves, life stages. The torrent salamander does migrate quite far up into that wood area. That might help narrow kind of which species we kind of prioritize these regions. And I guess for the species that are most sensitive, should that be something that, to add on to that, would that be something more like what are most sensitive to forest practices? Would that be good to add, or should we leave it kind of like, I mean, this is brainstorming, so. Probably the most relevant to this discussion. Targeting.
Another question would be, do we even know how sensitive some species are to forest practices? And that might be a study down the road, even, as we learn more about the demographics and distribution, somewhere down the road, in the outreach. Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt your.
No, I was done.
Okay,
I was rambling.
Yeah, I guess to add to that, when we're thinking about these, like the connection to rule set and the effectiveness of them, one that comes to mind is do, essentially a question of do the steep slopes rules and the steep slope model effectively protect the amphibians that are in that zone between headwall and fish bearing stream, right? That zone that we're looking at with the steep slopes regulations.
Okay. So I'm sorry, can you repeat that one?
Oh yeah. See, what are the, I guess you got to look at, so.
Okay. I mean, I can change it.
What are the impacts of the to amphibian species that are in the steep slope zones from headwall to fish bearing stream of the regulations, right? Do the regulations improve their persistence on the landscape or not? Are they effective?
Well, to why it's
To fish bearing stream, because that's really the zone of new regulation is from headwall to fish bearing. And specifically around the other rules that.
yeah.
Commissioner Tucker.
One of the things that has caused me to wonder is I think if we're talking about private forests, and I look at the private forests as they lay in the county that I live in, when the county I'm running, and I both represent all counties, but I can speak for Lynn and Marion and Lane. A big chunk of our land is federal, and so what we have is we have stretches of streams that go through. State forest lands and private forest lands, lands that were turned over to the state to be used for development. And then we have a whole bunch of land that was retained by the Forest Service that is actually all a majority of my upstream. I mean, yes, there are a lot of streams that end in this lower level, but it's different than Tillamook and Clatsop, where they have very little federal land. And so when we talk about private forest lands, we're seeing there'll be a bigger mix there than here in state lands. So my question is how do we make sure we know what's happening upstream from us? Because the upstream impact is everyone lives downstream, and we all live downstream. But what is the impact? And what do we have in those federal systems that are doing that are monitoring and managing the same thing? Because if critters move to where the lifestyle is better, would they migrate from a private forest that's been thinned to a federal forest that's not? I just don't know what the impact is of the land ownership surrounding the private lands.
Well, that partially gets at one of the other ones that I thought would be really interesting. That is, tracking the movement and the use of the landscape by, of these species. To the extent possible, it would be really cool to put a tracker on them and see where they go with these different species. What's the distribution? What's the seasonality of some of these things? Summer months versus winter months, and ridgetop versus valley. And then, of course, land ownership could be a part of that as well. Are they using one habitat and one another? I don't know, but I don't know who was first.
Adam is actually.
Oh, Adam. Go ahead, Adam, and then Stacy.
Okay. I guess one question on my mind is I think stepping back is what's, and maybe we already have a good sense of this, but what is the like the primary drivers or factors that influence I think abundance might be the right term there, and then also the within species diversity as well.
Good addition. Sorry for missing you.
No worries. Thanks.
Stacy.
I was just gonna second, the migration question of understanding where they are, and I know it kind of get to Jennifer's question, and a question that's come up a lot is around isolated seeps and springs, and I think that, by broadly asking questions around where they're moving, what habitats are they in, that might also help inform that piece of this stuff. Watching.
I have a couple of comments. So I have a good friend in graduate school who did do this research on bullfrogs. She put transmitters sutured inside of them and tracked them, which is very interesting. But I just want to talk a little bit about, time frame for these projects. So yes, we want to know when they move throughout the year. There are multiple studies that talk about like the impacts, the short-term impacts versus the long-term impacts. So thinking just about what we're asking this committee the group to do about how long to have this monitoring project would be important. Is there an immediate effect, but long term it's less so, or vice versa?
That's good.
Something to really consider.
Right, because there's a bunch of research that's like, in this time period, you've seen this, and then it seems like if you look in the same site 7 years later, it's different, right?
Absolutely, and I think there's a lot of
As the site changes.
as the site changes, and then within this whole, within the state that we're talking about, or even just in the Cascades, being thoughtful about trying to find comparative sites. So we have these diverse sites, they could not give us a clear-cut answer what we're looking for, and it's always it depends. So I think just being thoughtful with that committee.
Is it okay if I move to the next slide though, because it's getting a little busy? I want what I'm typing up. Unfortunately, I would have gone for the whiteboard, but we did a Zoom test and it was like looking at something with the wrong set of glasses, or when you need glasses at an eye appointment. So we were unable to do that.
That's already getting pretty small.
Yeah.
Go ahead and go to the next one. I wonder if we could cut and paste some of those into another slide, and then maybe go start on a third slide. Okay. Because I think my goal would be at the end of this, once we put stuff up there, we can kind of go back through and look at the list that we've created, and then try to lump a little bit where we could put things together that seem to be asking similar questions.
Yeah, maybe
that I think will help.
Okay, should we have like general knowledge versus real effectiveness?
You pick where to slice it, because I can't see any of it.
Let's see. These are like more, I guess.
And don't worry about trying to group it yet. Just grab and paste on another slide. That way we'll do the grouping later. But that way we'll be able to see what you actually have written. There you go. That's better. And start with a new one. Or, yeah. If you want to go back to the slide you were just on and cut those ones out so that it blows back up.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, let's keep going. I didn't mean to stop momentum. I just wanted to take notes. Make sure we can go back and visit it.
Should I try to do something?
Sure. Yeah. So you see, it's cheap to start a new slide, right? It's free. Just hit duplicate.
No, I just want to make sure that the time frame question is addressed. Or move it around. Having a long-term study would be, I think, the most beneficial to distinguish between those short-term.
What length of the study are we looking at? Different short versus long term? Yeah.
And especially with their effectiveness monitoring strategy in movement, right?
We they see amphibians in 25 years, correct? That fish are 50.
And I will clean all this up after the meeting and actually have a Word document where things are a little easier to access for everyone. So it's all kind of one, if that works for you all. All right.
Yeah. The challenge with, of course, this is always the case with science, right? It's like the short term's easier and cheaper, and you can get it quicker. The long term is better, more informative, more expensive, and you have to be patient. So it's like,
sometimes you can do kind of one within the other too.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, there's updates too that you can.
Yeah. Oh.
Those issues with planting a bunch of trees and then teenage trees are really huge thing. you know, use up a lot of resources because they're growing, and so just capturing those signals.
Yeah. Great point. Because your signal at year 3 is likely going to be quite a bit different than year 13, 23.
To add to it, the take analysis is chapter 5, the HCP, right? And I know that there are a lot of issues around what do we know and how much can we say in the HCP at this point about the potential for take from forest practices that are covered by HCP. And it seems like an important thing to capture in this is that we should be looking at where the gaps are within our scientists who are drafting that chapter of the HCP. It's like, what do we not know in the taking section, and how can we use this opportunity to gather that knowledge? I think you're getting it. I think it's more, yeah, exactly. What do we not know? What are the gaps that are identified in the HCP? And how can we use this work to further that knowledge? Sweet.
So, okay.
Julie, next.
Wendy's.
Or sorry, Wendy, not Julie. Wendy.
Oh.
I was looking at Wendy and saying Julie.
Everybody's Julie today.
Yeah.
Yeah, my thoughts was like sort of what you were saying, Courtney, not Julie, was reminding me that I think we want to prioritize this. And this is brainstorming, so let's throw everything out there. But it does strike me that there'll probably be some points at which you can get kind of 80% knowledge earlier on versus the sort of outlying 10% that we can get in 20 years. Like I think the amphibian timeframe is a 25-year HCP. So to me, it would make sense after we do the brainstorming to make sure that we, in addition to look at some of the hard questions, try and ask research questions like, what are some of the easier things? If 80% of these species are found in seeps, let's move forward and focus on that and not slow down based on far dispersal of certain species on eastern dry areas. It's saying that we could be practical in our prioritization to get more efficacy. So just looking at the report.
And we can try to
legislature. The BGOs, that's going to be our goal, and not in a 50-year thing. Sure.
Yeah, it is important to show progress for funding reasons too.
Totally agree with you, Wendy, that in the spirit of just throwing a bunch of stuff up on there, I just wanted to add east side. And I think starting with the west side is still where we need to be. And I would prioritize that, but I don't want to forget east side habitat, east side species, and if there's some way to include that as well as we move forward.
Something that I think might be, well, would be really beneficial, and maybe the IRST already has it, but understanding, and this kind of goes back to the demographics, but understanding some of the life history of each one of these species. How much do we know about their evolutionary past, and so I think that would inform, where we focus moving forward. As I understand it, and I'm not an amphibian specialist, but they're one of the oldest species on the planet, I believe. Or species is probably the wrong way to put it. They're one of the oldest families, I guess, on the planet.
We won't judge you if you get it wrong.
Yeah. But it would be, I think that would be really, really good information to have as well. And maybe, like I said, the IRST might already have that, but it would be helpful to have that be quantified somewhere in whatever research we do. It would be helpful to have a sort of a background synthesis of what we know about the species, and then, have that dovetail into where we go from here.
Add on to that too, if you're just speaking to like a literature review, just trying to figure out what the information's out there. But also if there's information about their adaptive capacity, they have been all around here for a very long time. So like, what is the immediate adaptive capacity of these amphibians that we're specifically talking about to change? So are they flexible, or are they very strict in their governments?
So this is Dave. One question I've had for a long time is what are the effects of potential climate change scenarios on amphibians, whether it's regarding stream temperatures, atmospheric temperatures, level of humidity, drought, etc. That would be some things that could be out of our way out of our purview, things that we really have no effect on, but yet could be quite significant and quite significant.
Stacy.
It's not much a question, but just thought throw into the mix. The mitigation funding, also research is, as I understand it, an eligible activity, and amphibians are, I hope, equally important as salmon in funding for those projects. So that may be an additional avenue if there's maybe some more targeted questions, or there's a partner or an organization that is doing some of this work. This is a way to kind of leverage the work that we're able to do in this space. So just an idea in the mitigation committee.
Okay.
Yeah. That's just another additional pot of funding for maybe a side research question or additional ones that maybe the IRST and AMC aren't prioritizing, but could be done to sort of support other work.
Essentially, can we team up with them?
Yeah.
Okay.
Jason, or sorry, Casey and then Jason.
Oh, that's good. I'm in the room. It's easier for me.
Okay. Go ahead, Jason.
Great. So just a more of a specific question related to tribes is how do we incorporate traditional ecological knowledge into this as well beyond just the science? But is there a cultural component here that we should be considering for questions?
And Dave,
I think it's important. Go ahead. Just get this, I think, traditional ecological knowledge. I would put that phrase somewhere in there. That's sort of a term of art. I think it's a good point.
I missed it. I couldn't remember what it was all said.
There's nothing like typing and misspelling while people are watching. For me to at least feel silly.
And speaking of which, should we go to a new slide?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. I can just barely still read that.
Yeah, just keep telling me when you're ready for a new one, and we'll do that accordingly.
Casey.
Yeah, so I'm calling that while I'm apparently harping on that or like focusing back on the HCP each time. So we have a whole section on change circumstances and the assurances, right? So one of the things is that if we in the HCP, for those who don't know, like if you say, hey, this is a foreseen thing and we're gonna make a plan for it if the situation changes, and then we have to do the work. So some of those I recall is like major disturbances, listing a new species, climate change.
Yeah, I think
use of PFAS, I think is one of them as well. And a lot of the kind of the solution, the negotiated answer in the HCP was it goes see. And it makes me wonder whether we could probably, when we're thinking about amphibians and effectiveness of the rule set, that we should at least reflect back to what in the changed circumstances have we essentially punted as the solution is to go back to amphibians. And if that doesn't make any sense, I'm sorry.
I don't quite know how to phrase that to be honest.
Yeah,
Okay, so I guess are you asking like where might we
I think he's just saying that if we if I understand you correctly, Casey, he's just noting that if we are noting some, if we start to see some sort of big findings that we feel are substantial, then this committee would need to review whether they change circumstance.
Yeah.
For the HCP.
Yeah, and so when we're considering our research questions, we should be considering the fact that the change circumstance, any change circumstances in the HCP will send a question back to us around how we might change the rules.
My understanding is that change circumstances though isn't necessarily in and of itself a so if we're finding some responses from so let's say we're looking at amphibians in an ELZ and we find that they are this abundant in ELZ but they're that abundant in our ELZ, right? And maybe they're more abundant in our ELZ than in ELZ, so we're then talking about okay, what's our takeaway from that, right? That in and of itself isn't necessarily a change circumstance. It would be more of a, are we seeing some sort of a dramatic change in the population based on what we're witnessing in the question that we asked? And if that were the case, then, or I mean, a more traditional change circumstance under an HCP wouldn't necessarily deal with the species itself. It would be more of some sort of an outside influence, like a massive earthquake came and swallowed up the entire coast range. Okay, it's a change circumstance, right? That's I think the idea around change circumstances. So it's a little bit odd to think of it in terms of, and so the issue I think in the HCP drafting was in determining whether something was a change circumstance and what to do about it. The AMC would seem like the proper place because this is the group where we would prioritize a question to see whether, to do some monitoring to see if that change circumstance really did.
It all comes down to your work on the effectiveness monitoring strategy. Yeah, exactly. So effectiveness monitoring, we see a signal, AMC identifies it as a signal of some kind of habitat change that's related to forest practice or climate change. Or a devastating wildfire, and then we make a determination from there who we need to ask more research questions. And I think for the purposes of this brainstorm, it's important to remember that there will be more than just us asking this question, our IRST. It's in the context of effectiveness monitoring and the potential for changes in the type proxies and elements leaking. So amphibians might be in abundance one place or in another, but we're really going to be looking not at the big numbers so much as we're going to be looking at any effectiveness monitor. We're going to be looking at the habitat proxies, the measurements, the habitats.
So but I wouldn't anticipate that because it's expected that we're going to be harvesting trees and that these protection measures will be out there on the landscape. So that in and of itself isn't a change circumstance. Right. It's just so anyway, I don't know, but if we're calling it up, that's probably fine.
Yeah, I think you did a good job.
It's like really struggling here, so okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Who is next?
Oh, yeah,
I can't remember. Oh, some stuff online.
Yeah. Okay, all right. We did address that. Okay. Okay. All right. Was there anyone with a raised hand, Jacob? Okay. All right.
Anybody else?
I am Josh Rex.
I just keep thinking about the effectiveness monitoring piece. So I kind of feel like, for me, I sort of had my bite at the apple on this one. Because a lot of, for the amphibian stuff, for me, it's going to come down to the physical conditions in the stream as far as sediment and structure in place, and this is water quality. It's the water quality condition, or the water quality conditions there. Cool water without a level. Find sediment. Breathing space. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm one note. That's it.
Yeah. I remember a long time ago we talked about that in school. The in like genetics, so thank you.
Yeah, I am thinking that, what we're directed to do here is do research to make sure that the current rules, the HCP as it exists, is adequate to protect amphibians. And given that it was in the report, it says we don't have enough information now to really be confident about that. So it strikes me there is overlap with the effectiveness monitoring, but to a certain extent, we're being directed to act now to identify the information that would be relevant to whether or not the rules, which have not been typically created for amphibians, but rather I think for the fish, whether that's going to be adequately achieving the amphibian goals. Yes, so I think will eventually relate to the effectiveness monitoring and certainly logically. That's a little further down the road, I think.
Yeah. I guess the question I would have is, and I don't know if we know this, what is sufficient habitat for these species? What does that even mean? Do we know that?
Where do they live and how much do they need? Yeah.
What's their dispersal like?
Yeah. I guess we already might have that somewhere, but then
we can kind of
it's saying it in a, you know. See.
Think ahead a little bit here, which on these few buckets, it seems like there's at least one way to organize them. I just have to talk about this. We're hearing a lot of questions around life history or general knowledge or baseline conditions, around movement, dispersal, kind of things we were talking about. And there's sort of a ton of questions around the effects of forest practices over time. Jennifer was mentioning the ELZs, RELZs, climate change. As a bucket or research design around like scope and scale, being thoughtful about comparative sites. But I'm jumping ahead too far. I'm starting to hear some repetition, I think in a helpful way. So I just wanted to toss it out there in case that is useful framing or like, are we missing any of those three?
So if you could, maybe under this one or buckets of framing the questions, maybe list the buckets as like a 1, 2, 3, that and like a bullet list their own. That way we can kind of take a look at them and people can even we can even affect, put some stuff underneath each one. So life history, I would say, as well as life history, it's more of a well, there's maybe in that same boat. You guys correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah, general knowledge. That's what I was going to say. Life history, general knowledge. Could even literature review of some sort about each one of these species would be helpful. Then another bucket, and then I think you listed this as well, Stacy. I'd even put this as, it seems like it's the next one, even above effects of, I don't know if it matters what order they're in, so it probably doesn't matter, you can just put it below. But demographics and distribution and population sort of thing. Demographics probably covers it.
Well, wouldn't that go under life history?
No. A life history is more, what do we know about that? I see more as a literature review. Yeah, so this would be more around population, size, distribution.
Genetics, probably
genetic makeup, yeah. And so it's more of a sort of a study to go out and try to quantify and find them. And then also, also probably try to tag some. So maybe in that same would be what's the right word I'm looking for? Not distribution at that point, but it's more of a, where do they move? What's the right word? Migration is bad. Yeah, dispersal. That's the word I was looking for.
I'll have to say it.
Yeah. Thank you.
We have connectivity as well on one of those. It's been really been benefits here in our department.
So that research design, that's probably an overarching bucket, right? So we got demographics, and then we basically have an effects type study.
Yeah, and I mean, if we wanted to, we could take a quick break while I put these in those buckets. And then, you know, if people want to get seconds or whatever with the food, things like that, or first, I don't know, right? You got to have something. So
does that make sense there for everybody? Take a break. What do we need? What do you need, Emily? 10 minutes? 15? I'll come back at 1:45.
And I'll just get a slide for each bucket. Yeah. I'll leave the original slide.
The computer says it's 1:31. We'll be back at 1:40. 14 minutes.
Yeah, I did send you an email with like a rough version of that.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you. That's very nice.
And then we'll have through one of the buckets, but
that is very kind of you. Appreciate it. I'll just have to get, you know what, I'm just gonna use pen and paper over here.
ELC is an equipment
limitation zone. Yeah.
What's the part of ELC?
Retention equipment limitation zone. So the only difference is one requires that the landowner leave trees that are a certain size and under. So they're basically non-merged trees. You wouldn't get, you can't cut those. So it's, I think what was it, Stacy and Casey? Do you remember the 6 inches? It's right, 6 inches and below. So trees that are at least 6 inches or smaller, you have to leave those on an RELZ. In many cases, people will leave those anyway in an ELZ because they're not mergeable. But in the RELZ, you have to leave those. And so on the landscape, the way that works is if it's a perennial stream, perennial non-fish, small perennial non-fish stream, so then it gets a buffer up to a certain length in the field, right? After that point, if it continues perenniality, right? If it dries up and it becomes seasonal at that point, then it's an ELZ, for the rest of it. But if there's still, you met your max buffer, but there's still some area that's above that is perennial stream, you have to leave an RELZ, meaning you have to leave those 6 inches or smaller trees. You can still harvest the merchantable stuff, but you have to leave the smaller stuff.
So the ground disturbance or limitation essentially for both ELC and RELC. If you go above that, then you need to mitigate that.
Yeah.
If you're reading China, right. Or maybe you're
the whole thing wasn't like limitation, so if you have to move a piece of equipment,
I can remember exactly what you do.
Go in a little bit. If you turn up the ground right there, you have to mitigate that. So in essence, the way that we're telling, the way we're training operators, and Rex can speak to this more.
That's okay, because I'll probably.
It's equivalent if you see it.
Oh, certainly, yeah, but that's
right there.
Right.
You don't want to wait until you're doing it. And there's a fourth practice that says, oh, you have a ground where you turn them dirty. You were in that. Second of all, if you do move in there and you see that you've caused, some sort of ground disturbance, then mitigate for it. And the mitigation is probably so
thanks to Stacy, I appreciate it. It made it a lot easier. So I put these ones together, the demographics and the, next to each other, the demographics and the life history one, but let me know if there's something that you think is missing from each type of slide, I guess. I'll just let you look at.
Go ahead.
What is TEK?
That's traditional,
Ecological knowledge.
traditional knowledge. I will actually just write that out just so that people.
Goal this bucket, right, is more sort of figuring out what we already know. And then second, the demographic one would potentially be new research. Yeah.
And then for those of us who aren't into the traditional ecological knowledge, where can I find something to read? What can I read? Because I need to contribute to anything. I'm going to need to do a lot of work here.
To understand that a little bit more.
Yeah.
Jason, do you have a good reference or good suggestion for anyone interested in learning more about what traditional ecological knowledge is, or even specific to this question? Or
Yeah, I can actually come up with some stuff and send it out. I'll just have to say it depends, because it really depends on the culture that you're discussing, the tribal government that you might be visiting with, and their awareness of certain factors in their area. So there's a lot of, it's not a tried and true, you can just apply it across the board. It really comes down to individual knowledge of their local areas and resources.
So I think it would be, I mean, an example, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Jason, but the way I understand it, an example would be if we're looking at, you know, a certain species of salamander that happens to be abundant in, you know, east of the Cascades, well, then you might, you know, you definitely want to check in with with the tribes over there. One of them, you know, like the Warm Springs, do they have information that's, you know, captured in stories or other means that they've handed it down over time that has to do with that species, and what information does that provide, you know, in terms of abundance or movement or distribution across the landscape or things like that. So it's basically an acknowledgement that there's other information out there that was held by these tribes prior to, you know, universities quantifying and keeping spreadsheets.
I get it, but I just, my knowledge there is zero, and that's scary for me. I'll be sensitive, but when you've got size 12 shoes on, or you're 70 years old, you're not as sensitive as someone who's lighter, younger. So I'd love to have a chance to change my knowledge.
Any other comments on this slide before we move to the next one?
It's entirely possible that we actually don't know a lot of the answers to these questions. So I think, like, yes, acknowledging a literature review, but they're, at least amphibians, they're cryptic. I feel like they don't get as attention as the larger, you know, charismatic species or economically important species. So just keeping in mind that there might be, we don't want to say low-hanging fruit, but more immediate research questions that could be done, like we talked about, like in the short term, to answer some of these.
Yeah, that's a good point, and it's kind of why we're here, is because the authors couldn't find the accumulated science to really find agreement. And so, yes, and while there will be a literature review, it might not in any way be sufficient.
Well, that in and of itself may, you know, one of the things that we may find is the literature review. So in some instances where we ask a very specific question, like we've done in the past for like, the literature review is like, okay, you're going to do a literature review, but then you're going to go out and answer that question. But in this case, it might really be where for some of these species, the literature review highlights some of the dramatic holes that exist, right? And then we don't want to prescribe. We might not want to pre-prescribe what we think the question is until we have an idea of the literature review, right?
Yeah. Want to know what you know and know what you don't know.
Yeah. Emily, great.
And you could phrase it that way in the question, see like, hey, what are the major gaps that should be the focus of the research that is turned up by the initial literature review and scoping proposal, and have a follow-up discussion, I guess. Like, I mean, I'm sure like as long as we hit all the steps that are required in rule, like there's probably room for extra steps to like make sure we're actually going for the questions that make the most sense for the subject matter.
And again, I think the other thing that we focus on here is that we don't have to, I think it's unrealistic to think that we're gonna learn everything there is to learn about amphibians in the next 25 years. And this committee is gonna do it. Like, it's like, people have been researching this, around the world. Anyway, I think that we need to be wise about where we focus. There will be other things we also want to study at the same time, right? That aren't amphibians. And so trying to make sure that we choose wisely and that we have enough information to help us sort of inform decisions as we move forward, but not get too stuck on having it be, we need to learn everything now, sort of thing. We just need to build the knowledge base. Wendy.
Yeah, my thoughts were along the same lines, which again, and when you said low hanging fruit, I know it's not low hanging fruit, but again, to me, I'm interested in some within 5 years, 80% sort of territory, not trying to figure everything out, but we haven't seen the slides that yet, right? Because there are a couple more, but I think it could be useful to have a brainstorming of whole process to save some of our thoughts that we've been making about how to like maybe because I like the idea of maybe having a literature review that might identify some current gaps, and then also after that have some question identification that's on a slightly longer time frame, or slightly larger questions.
Yeah, you want to go to the next slide? There we go.
Sorry. But it's more specific, so I just put that kind of under there.
And I think that third bullet calls out that these are different species, right? So even in the the first few bullets, you could have multiple studies looking at multiple different specific species to understand distribution, movement, dispersal. So some idea that would help us, for example, prioritize that would be like the previous slide, right? Are there some species that we already know something about their distribution, their movement, dispersal, and are those that we don't know anything about it? That might help us prioritize where we money from the beginning. Go ahead.
No, I just want to second that, and something that Casey brought up earlier was that some of the protections that are a little more stringent might overlap with species that already exist there, and so maybe we should focus. A thought would be to focus some of this research questions on those that are more uncertain. So like just figuring out our range and scope of uncertainty for what they need or how much they're being protected by these rules.
I mean, I feel like that's kind of on there. Okay, I just want to make sure it was captured somewhere.
Good. Want to go to the next one? And
Last bullet, are we talking about climate change in order like in conjunction with these rules, or are we just talking about climate change in general? Like you could do scenarios of, is it going to get warmer, more water, less water in certain areas? But are we also looking at how the forest protections are helping mitigate some of those potentially, or are they making them, exacerbating them? I just think that's very broad and doesn't need to be answered now necessarily, but maybe what we how we define talk about climate change.
The interaction of climate change and forest practices.
Yeah.
Or the effectiveness of the rules and forest practices. That's actually one of the main service needs issues. It's like, okay, how are they interacting? Not just that's nice.
You want to go to that? Isn't there one more?
Just one more, just wanted to show.
One thing that just may not need to be said, but may need to be said is that, I continue on this one, but I should probably also look at Rex. That is, there are some forest practices that aren't covered by the HCP. Do we want to have those things be the subject of a research question?
What kind of thing?
We could, so specifically, application of herbicide is not covered under, the HCP. It's not gonna be.
That's the only thing I could think of immediately, but there's probably other.
No, I think that might be the only one, right? I think every other common forestry activity is covered. It was, chosen not to include that just because it's not been included. To our knowledge, there is no HCP that covers that activity, so we didn't want to be the first because that's a lot of heartburn for the federal service system getting through that hoops on that, so that's not covered. I mean, certainly there's nothing that would preclude that. It would have to be lower priority than something within the HCP because it's outside of the HCP.
I just think it might be useful to have a little note in there. Things that are forest practices that are also covered activities under the HCP may want to be the priority. Unless we feel differently.
So sorry, what did you say?
Oh, sorry, unless we feel differently, but prioritizing research that look at the covered activity that are also forest practices rather than all of the forest practices.
Yeah.
Just feel a little narrow. If we're worried about species survival, if we only look at those things that are included practices, if herbicides is a hard one, because I think it is such a huge, different related topic.
Right.
But if there was a topic that came up that wasn't a covered practice, it would somehow need to be researched or looked at or addressed for species, I'd be all in for that because that's the motivation for being here is species survival. But that's just an observation.
It seems relevant to our biggest question, which is if the HCP is effective in protecting covered species.
Yeah, but you got to think about the HCP. The HCP is not able to cover every activity for everything, right? So the HCP isn't going to cover, for example, stuff outside of the focus of forestry, right? And so it's not going to cover hiking. It's not going to cover, camping in the woods and what the effect of that is on covered species. So there's other things outside the realm of the HCP. Saying I could definitely see a study around that you're talking about there, Casey. But I think our marching orders in the per the PFA legislation and rules is to prioritize first those activities and species covered under the HCP. If there is, we certainly can look at things outside of that, but we are to give priority to the ones that are inside the HCP. That's pretty clear in the rules.
Okay, I put lower level priority in there to reflect that.
Yeah.
Thanks. Thanks for letting me go down that path. Okay. Let's at least raise the subject.
You want to go to the next one?
Yeah.
This is a pretty good list. I feel like this was helpful to get these things down and talk it through. I think this is a good first step. Is there things that now that we've seen these buckets and the lists that are on there, other things that people are seeing that, oh, I should have mentioned this or said that? So from
I was just gonna say, I like the idea of maybe having some discussion of how to frame it in terms of what the goal is. And then the idea that we talked about of having an initial maybe literature review to see what's out there that's available in the short term as knowledge. And then the second tier where we look at questions that are maybe harder to research over a long period of time. So that could go on the slide for research design or overarching goal or how to build an IRST or something like that.
Maybe we can do something. Oh, jeez. Sorry. Okay. So, which I mean, we do have that built-in literature review at the start, so that'll be something. Well, we have to, I mean, it has to start with questions, right? So we need to have more generalized research questions. The first,
yeah, so we could start with a study that, or with a question that what are the population, demographics and distribution, what do we know about that for each one of these species? Right, and then that in and of itself would kick in a literature review, and then for each one of those would be separate questions. So that even just asking that question is 5 questions, which with 5 literature reviews specific to those species. And could potentially, depending on what we know about that, turn into a study itself, right? To look at population distribution.
I'd like to have a bullet saying that some of our questions might be our general research questions, might come up with answers sufficient to take action on. And then maybe we do second tier research. Okay, but people.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
And that's the low hanging fruit issue. It's like, well, we might not have enough information right now.
Yeah. I covered it.
Active in the video thing.
I guess like to me, like maybe as I'm not a researcher, but to me, it seems like if we have a successful literature review that's based on particular questions, the literature review itself might answer some questions. So that's why I'm thinking like it's to research could proceed for some questions, but maybe some easier questions might have already been answered by that literature review.
Right. I agree. And so then we're kind of back to the same issue we had with the east side slopes issue, where it's like our question could just be, what do we know about this topic? And then it's like, well, that will require a literature review, but that literature review will require literature.
Yeah.
So it gets, so I don't know that we should spend a little bit of time. Maybe that's a worthwhile thing to bring up on our field trip with the IRST and sort of sort through, because this whole idea that we have to ask a different question other than what do we know about it? What's the, give us the literature review around this. I feel like we should be able to ask for just a literature review.
But maybe we can ask the INR. Maybe that's the question we ask the INR.
Ask INR to produce that before we ask.
If that is just a simple literature review, maybe just go straight to the INR.
Maybe that's a way to do it. And maybe that's something we could flag, frankly, Emily and Stacy for our future co-chairs meeting.
I actually got an email from Lisa today asking what you both might want to put on the itinerary for that meeting. Would you mind just like sending me an email with some ideas?
Yeah, we'll follow up with that.
Okay.
So just so everybody knows what we're talking about. So we've been trying to schedule So they've got their chair and they don't call it co-chairs over on the IRSD. It's chair and vice chair, I think. But essentially it's co-chaired, right? Chair and vice chair. And we've been talking about trying to organize some sort of frequency with a co-chair to co-chair and you know, odious facilitator to facilitator. So we're all in the same on a call together and we can try to solve some of these things like that question.
And they they also hired a facilitator as well. So I mean, I'll be there, of course, but like they also have a really great facilitator for their meetings that'll be there, and then the 2 INR people will be there. So just to kind of give everybody an idea.
Surface, get some answers and stuff like that, surface some questions, and try to do that without having, both committees have to get together and we can bring it back to the group and say, this is what we discussed and this should help us moving forward. Things like process issues.
I think for my question about the short versus long-term, paired studies, going through a literature review, but not necessarily what's been done, but what went wrong. Then how to design a study that's better in those areas. I know there were a couple that were cited that when they wrote the HCP, and they were saying, this study said this and this study said this, but there were specific reasons why they thought that those yielded the results and lessons learned. So that might be something that your study design. Yeah.
Like lessons learned from.
Well, there have been lots of studies that have long-term and short-term for practices in their effects on amphibians, but there hasn't been a consensus. So I'd like to see, what did they think? What were the reasons why they keep getting different results?
Yeah.
And then how do we move forward if you're going to invest in a long-term research? What traps are in front of you?
Yeah, there's a tendency when different studies find different results and just go, well,
right.
But there's usually information in there if you dig, like, well, what's driving the variability? Response can be a really interesting question and be important for management.
Yeah.
It could be an unseen cofactor happening that
methods
need to look at.
Right.
Methods might be a big one there. And so like some sort of question around research design, what are the different methods to collect some of this information? And are some more effective than others? I would imagine there are probably some that cost a lot of money and are a lot more intensive, which probably result in different results with this sort of so what are you giving up by using different types of methods? And
so to your observation there, I'm kind of looking at the I think maybe in the PFA final report, and one of the sentences is the authors have differing opinions. You may have written this one, Stacey, so apologies. The authors have differing opinions regarding the conclusion that genetic analyses documented broader landscape scale dispersal patterns in the following studies, and then it lists a bunch of studies. And maybe I'm just trying to figure out what you're saying, but maybe I'm also saying is the difference of opinion related to something that we can out or find out?
Exactly.
Okay,
I was actually thinking about that exact paragraph.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, interpretation and why certain interpretations were made, and there are ways to study something that allow for
more clarity.
Yeah. Yes.
Right. Given the knowledge that's there.
Yes.
That should be the goal. So that's a good one to capture.
That's helpful.
Stacey.
Yeah, I really like that question. I think a little bit in pausing. I was not a major amphibian person in the work group, but I know that there was a lot of effort to look at the existing science. And my understanding is that there's some questions and there are also some really big gaps. And so I worry a little bit about spending too much time doing a lit review that's going to show that. But I like the idea of taking that and really asking the question, well, why are there the gaps? Why is this difference here? And sort of how do we move beyond that?
Yeah, or why is it controversial? Why were the results controversial?
Right.
Maybe controversial. Difference of opinion.
Yeah.
And then move into the solution of like, well, how would we design something, right, that would
Yeah. How can we design? Yeah, how can we design one based on those experiences that will have a more a higher likelihood of clarity on the results? Absolutely. I mean, that's the goal. We try to get the best information we can to inform the discussion that follows. We don't want to put ourselves in this constant loop where we go, well, we can't make a determination on this. We got to do another study.
That's the worst.
Stacy.
Just thinking about all of that, I mean, one thing that comes to mind. Again, I don't know a ton about those science, but it seems like there's a relatively smaller group of folks who are really focused on this in Oregon. And I wonder if there's some benefit of early on trying to bring in some of those science experts. I know IRST has that ability. I don't know what form that would take, but it just seems like maybe that would move us further along in the process of understanding sort of where to go next if we bring in this early.
Yeah, and I know IRST is still, starting this out and how to work with it, but they've talked about, the idea of forming work groups with under the IRST that are not necessarily similar to our work groups, in that our work groups are members of the committee. They're talking about trying to form work groups around, for example, this question where they would bring in experts, like you're saying, that are involved in research to then help them suss out, like, amongst that group, what are the methods that they've used in different studies, and what were the pluses and minuses of those methods, and if we're going to try to make something a gold standard here, what methods should we be working at, right? And those folks would help with that. So I think it's a good idea. We can talk to them more about that and get more of an idea if they would be thinking around those lines, I think, on our field trip. The other challenge there, though, is it's a fairly small group, right, of researchers, as you say, that are interested in that at Oregon studying it. And I would imagine those are the same people that are going to be putting forward proposals. So, yeah.
When we talk about organ amphibians, maybe organ needs to be in brackets or parentheses, because it might be there's so few that are actually doing organ research that we need to be looking at research that is broader than Oregon. So going up into Washington, down in Northern California, into British Columbia. But for the research techniques, for the parameters, for those type of things, there might not be the organ research base that we think there could be.
Is that better? Just
Thank you. No, I think especially as it pertains to demographics and that sort of thing, research that is, done in Washington and Oregon, as an example, is totally should be totally included.
And I also think about the new techniques, maybe in finding DNA in the water and something that we might not have done in Oregon, but it's being done.
Like testing of methods, that sort of thing. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, sorry. I said an eDNA,
Right. I mean, we are just past the point where, like, discussing Eastern Oregon steep slopes questions, but that should be that should be fairly quick, considering they didn't make any changes, but I just want to let you guys know.
And Rex is about to raise those. Myself and Aster. All right. Before we move on, I wanted to make sure.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry, I missed you, Rex.
Well, it struck me as listening to all the conversation is, much of the research on tech support practices is a point in time, space of time, and something as complex as an amphibian. I would hope that it's implicit that we consider resiliency over time. I think it would have been the first bucket, but
yeah, and I think that
I can guarantee you in year 1 or 2, it's going to look a whole lot different than it does in the control versus year 5 or 10.
Yep, and I think that gets to, I'm sorry, Courtney. I knew it started with C, but I was.
I'll go by
Courtney. I think that gets to Courtney's plenty of tracks. I think it's a good one. We're looking at short-term sort of immediate responses. Are we looking at, some sort of over time or even, and space?
It sounds like Emily was gonna wrap us up, but this has been helpful to me, so thanks for sharing all your.
Well, I just wanted to see if there were any other discussions we wanted to have at this time before, or if we wanted to take a break and do, by break, I mean like break from this and look at the questions real quick, just, be like, okay, we're good on the IRSP.
Let me do a quick check online. Anybody online, have any input that you'd like to get in here? I think we're getting to a point on this sort of brainstorm session of a good stopping point. We've put things in buckets. We've even added and sort of shaped a little bit of what the buckets look like. I think this has been, I agree with Casey, this has been really helpful for me, and hopefully it's helpful for everybody here to just sort of coalesce from this very broad subject into a little bit more manageable buckets where we're honing in maybe on some ideas that we can then bring to our next sort of educate, opportunity to learn more in our field trip. And we sort of bring these thoughts there. We can review what you put together based on these notes and have that in our hands as we're meeting out there and talking about current research and what's happening. And then that will feed into even, honing in a little bit further. So I think this has been very helpful. But let me pause and see if there's any last comments online first.
Not for me, but appreciate the conversation. I think that was really helpful. Thanks.
All right, thumbs up. Anybody in the room have anything more, Stacy?
A quick process question. I know we've been trying to use more of these work groups. I think it feels like we're kind of aligning more clearly maybe on this one. But just given time and trying to move things forward, do we want to create a small amphibians work group that would kind of take some of these things? Is that too premature? Just throwing it out there.
I think it's premature. I think actually the field trip would be the right place, I think, for us to try to figure out what the question is.
I tend to lean that way as well, personally. I think it would be really good to get to the field trip and then come back from in the follow-up meeting, see how far we can get, and maybe at that point we get to a place where we're getting pretty close, and maybe after at the conclusion of that meeting, we have a work group that helps put the final touches on an idea. That feels right to me, but I'm open to other people's
thoughts. And then you
thoughts.
could do a presentation from the legislature about how even the amphibian questions.
The only alternative that I kind of was thinking might make sense is we could figure out who's in the work group and then schedule something after the field trip. And then, so between the meeting and the field trip, if there's enough time, have them go over it one more time so we have an easier time of organization at the following meeting. But we're still thinking about the field trip so that's also an option. But I think either way would work out.
Yeah, as someone who is representing Julie, who's not here to consent to be in a work group, no, I'm sure she wants to, maybe we table that until she's back.
Yeah, I feel like I wouldn't want to, in that vein, I think the idea is a good one to help hone us in, but I don't want to take it offline in a group too quickly and sort of cut in front of the full group being able to weigh in. following the field trip and have that discussion. I think that might be a more, even a more transparent way to do it amongst ourselves and with the people that are following along.
That makes sense. Okay, are we all comfortable with what we have now? And I will, I'll send both the raw slides the way they are, and then a Word document with the ones that are just on the bucket slides, so that you have two different formats to look at, and we still have all the general notes from the brainstorming slides. That way, if you think maybe something was missed in one of those buckets, you can, say something, and I'll add it in.
That's great. And if you could label that document when you make it, just label it like notes from today's meeting, so that it's clear that there's not decisions there, and then we're not prioritizing anything. The list of things is not indicative of any sort of order. It's just brainstorm notes from a brainstorm session. I think that would be useful.
Yeah, I don't plan on putting any numbers or people points, but the buckets, I don't want people to think that the level of list matters. We're just trying to get organized here. So yeah, that sounds good. I'll make sure to say so.
All right. Well, I think we're ready to transition then for our next topic.
So next topic is the Eastern Oregon slopes.
I apologize for my bad eyes. Can you pull that back up?
Yeah, no worries.
I need to go to the eye doc.
Is this okay?
I realize I do.
Is this okay or more?
No, that's good.
Okay. So if you want to take a moment, I know it is on the website and stuff, but basically they haven't changed our questions, and the budget estimate and scoping proposal and the lit review, they're estimating to have that by the 31st of December to us, which is the same, as you might note, as our roads package. When I was at the IRST meeting, they indicated that the lit review probably wouldn't take that long based on how Camille, who is one of our geography kind of specialists, she came and talked with them, and they kind of got the idea that there's not a lot of information out there on Eastern Oregon steep slopes. So it may be something that's more cut and dry that they do in-house. They're still kind of chewing on that, but they don't, from what I understand at this point, there's not a lot of worry about how long it'll take to get this lit review done, because there's not a whole lot to review. So just give a heads up.
Okay. All right, any discussion on this point? It looks like they just, so good job, I think, for the MC. We learned from the last one, and the second question we gave them was good. So nice work.
But we are supposed to have a process check here, which was that refinement, which there isn't any, but with something like the question for me was, is there a process step for us to go through here?
Yeah, so the process in the rule is that if, that IRST can propose to change our literature, our research question, and then we would determine if their changed research question still met the original intent. So we don't need to do that, because the original question is the question they're moving forward with. So I think we're, per the rule, our process is still good. We don't have to do, there's nothing for us to check, because they just accepted our original question.
Yeah. Clearly
the original question meets our intent.
Yeah, just the part that specifically goes into that, I'll just read it verbatim from the rules. It's under 69-603-0200 4B. The IRST shall hone each preliminary research question into a final research question. The IRST shall communicate with the AMC via the Adaptive Management Program Coordinator to allow the AMC an opportunity to provide input to ensure that the AMC's original intent is maintained in the final research question. Following this communication, the IRST shall finalize the research question. So, I mean, our original intent, well, it's exactly the same. So I think in this case, that's already
I think we're good.
fulfilled.
So that's great. And they're gonna have something to us by end of December. So great. Josh.
So in the agenda, it says this is a substantial decision.
Yes.
So given that we're not accepting any edits because there are none, is it still a substantial decision item, or
No,
are we just standing on our previous decision?
Yeah.
And send in those questions?
no, exactly. There is no substantial decision to be made because they did not change our question.
Like nothing happened.
Right.
Yeah, and I got this at the end of last week because they had technically till the 25th.
So we had
We
put the potential for a substantial decision in here, erring on the side of on the side of informing the public that there could be a substantial decision with this, because we would have to look at their honed question. Since they did not hone our question, then there is no substantial decision to be made by the AMC at this time on this point. Okay.
Great. So it'll give us a little bit more time to focus on the process for determining new priorities. Again, sorry I didn't have the right version of the document. There are a bunch on Teams. I just misunderstood which one was correct.
Yeah, this is part of the, you know, and it's not your fault, Emily. It's just one of the fall downs of the shift from Terry to Emily. And I didn't see it soon enough, you know, to catch it earlier. So I apologize. But the version that she sent out, the second version that she sent out this afternoon, I think is the current one. And I'm looking at Josh and Lindy, because it was the three of us, right, that met to hone this in. And I really feel like this version that she's now got up here it's more simple, it's simplified from the first one, and we tried to the edits that we made were in an effort to really make it match the rule and the process under the rule. In so much that there was a process, there's pieces of it that we've added to create a better process for us. But then we tried to incorporate the rule into this as well. So one of the things that you'll notice there is that any member of the AMC can bring forward a research question at the time of bringing forward research questions, and then the AMC would consider those things, those questions, and look at them for priority. And I think this is a good place to remember that I think that this committee was made up of a whole bunch of different stakeholders, basically, around forestry. And you're sitting here as a representative of one of those stakeholder groups. And so that's not to say that every human is represented. And so we do have public opportunity for input. And certainly any one of us can be a champion of any one of those public points that they bring up and choose to highlight those. But it is truly the folks around this table that are the ones that are tasked to move the program forward. So that's kind of the spirit of what we put together. I don't know if Josh, if you have more to add to that.
Yeah, I would add that you just hinted at the idea that, you know, could any member of the public bring a research question? And we went, you know, we really actually, I think it's important to note for the public record, we really pondered that one a lot and kicked it around a lot, because it's really important that the public have a voice, but we also can't get bogged down by getting dozens of similar or very dissimilar research questions proposed to us, and then having to be in a position where we required ourselves to sort through each one of them. So that's why we settled on the approach of any AMC member can bring something forward, and anything that was communicated by a member of the public to one or more AMC members, that AMC member could look at it and say, you know what, this is a valid research question. I'm gonna, you know, maybe clean up the language a little bit or make it, you know, and then bring it forward. So it creates a way for members of the public to propose research questions, but it requires buy-in one AMC member so that we had some control over the throttle, basically. So I don't want anyone to take this as we're trying to prevent members of the public from proposing research questions, but that we also needed to keep an eye on making sure that MC didn't get overwhelmed and could function effectively.
Casey.
Thank you. Thanks for working on this. Of course, like being annoying and going back to the HCP, there's a couple of things in here. The first one though is section BD. Per rule, the Board of Forestry may direct the AMC to develop preliminary research questions. I'm trying to remember, and maybe I should just look at the rule for this. That is that a shall? Like, are they telling us what to do, or is it or it says, hey, you need to consider this, but we don't have to act on it?
That's a good question.
I didn't remember what that was.
I didn't bring my rules with me, unfortunately. Emily, are you looking at that? Right?
I'm looking for it right now. Just give me a moment.
I want to make sure that at least we know what our do's and don'ts are.
I think we were looking at the rule when we drafted this, the way we drafted it. And it says may, but it says the Board of Forestry may, right? And so it's at their discretion to bring us research questions. It doesn't really say that. D doesn't say whether we, I think it's still up to us to prioritize those questions. But it's a good question, Casey, whether that immediately jumps up on our priority list by virtue of the Board of Forestry authority.
Sorry, I'm scanning too.
Yeah, it's exactly like the board may direct the AMC to develop.
Yeah, I don't think it says
additional
one way or the other.
Well, yeah, that's exactly what it says in here, not
that's what I thought. I think
may.
we used their terminology, the terminology from the rule.
Okay, cool.
I mean, I would think that the way that would work out is if the weight of the board is behind it, we're probably gonna make that a priority.
Or we at least consider it.
We absolutely have to consider it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So under it's in there as qualitative research projects the AMC shall consider as a number of things and when support direction.
Yes.
Yeah. We have to consider it, but that has to be us discussing it for 15 minutes and then, deciding not to. So it really is. Shall consider and shall do.
And there's probably lots of factors there, right? Yeah. I mean, one could imagine a scenario where the board is directing us to have a certain thing on our list, right? But also acknowledges that we have limited resources and there's high priorities out there. So they want to get it on our list, but maybe not, force us to off-ramp everything else and move that to the front of the line. So it's probably dependent on the issue and the time and the resources and, so I think it's probably adequately listed the way it is.
Cool. And then the next one would just be, I think the based on natural disasters, regulatory legal issues, I think that probably then covers kind of the DQ question, which is other agencies, requesting research questions, right?
Which one was that?
Oh, that's just in section A, the AMC may decide ad hoc to develop a preliminary research question package per OAR, and then it's based upon, right? Because there's a clause, isn't there, about DEQ and other state agencies essentially requesting AMC time to look at a question that's not on the prioritized list or that's not under the DGOs. And maybe I should just pull up.
Pull up that OAR. That's probably also pretty verbatim.
And then I guess the third one is there is a clause in that section A about the federal agency recommendations. I think that's what it says, right? And we kind of went around and around on this in the HCP drafting, which is, can the HCP drafters do we, the drafters, have the authority to say what AMC or IRS team needs to do? And this was specifically around BGO metrics and identifying them. And so I'm just wondering where things like that play in. I didn't know, but we wrote it down, what authority the drafters had, basically ODF, the federal services and the authors, to bind IRST or AMC to do something. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
I was just wondering how it fits into this.
Yeah.
I was just wondering how it fits into this.
Well, first of all, let's go to the second question you asked.
Yeah.
Are you reading are you looking up that OAR right now?
Yeah,
629, 603, 0203.
Yes. And can you repeat the question one more time?
Well, can you read that OAR?
Oh.
0200 sub 3.
Oh, okay, yeah, it's just there's the sub 3 has an A and then A, B, C, D, E under A, and then, yeah, but I'll read the whole thing, okay. So step 1, the AMC shall develop preliminary research questions. 1A is the AMC shall succinctly specify preliminary research questions that include the following. A, the type of research and monitoring per OAR 629, 603, 0100, 1A or B, the rule, biological goals and objectives or other issue being studied, the objective of the research, a brief description of the context of the research question, and other information the AMC deems necessary for the IRST's work for section 4 of this rule. The board may direct and then this is the next little part, B, the board may direct the AMC to develop additional preliminary research questions. The AMC shall send the preliminary research questions to the IRST annually on a date specified in the AMC charter developed pursuant to OAR 629, 603, 0302.
It doesn't look like that's doesn't refer to other agencies that might want us.
That seems, yeah.
I just want to make sure that we.
Josh or Wendy, do you remember this part, that particular the discussion around that sentence? Because I'm having a hard time remembering how the sentence, however, the AMC may decide ad hoc, which I'm not sure what that means, to develop a preliminary research question package based on a natural disaster, regulatory or legal issue, unforeseen circumstance, and emerging research as well as board recommendation.
And I found that rule for my question, but
my thought, a little bit just remembering was that since my mind, the statute and rules give the AMC the ability to develop the questions, and then when we attach this to a charter, we're essentially using that authority. So I think we added the federal agency recommendations, thinking that was a good potential source of questions, even though I don't think there is specific language in the rules saying that. But I thought it came under our general authority to develop questions.
And also given that we have 10 voting AMC members, ODF has an ex officio member and national or NOAA fisheries service have an ad hoc member. So they are AMC members, right, just not voting members. So,
and they can, and as they can
absolutely propose a question. So I think we have that kind of federal, injury point in here. So
sure.
Since NIMS has an ex officio non-voting member.
And we've got DEQ, ODF, ODFW also on the committee.
As far as state agencies go.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what other state agencies would have a direct.
Those are the big ones, right?
Yeah, I mean, maybe Water Resources Division when we're talking about like midstream water rates or something.
Yeah,
it'd
be more obscure.
Yeah, and if WRD came to DEQ or ODFW and said, hey, we have something to consider because
then you guys could be the champion for it anyway.
Yeah, I think also this particular sentence has to do not just with prioritizing, but being able to do it on a faster timeline if need be.
All right.
Yeah, to be responsive in a short term rather than saying, oh, we only bring up questions at a certain date.
Yeah, and then to give some possibilities for what those places might be. And so just to clarify, I was trying to remember what the rule was, and it's 629, 603, 0600, which is under rulemaking topics. And it's basically in addition to this other stuff, the Board of Forestry may use the adaptive management program rulemaking process for rules that are not intended to achieve the biological goals and objectives. And it prioritizes, so the board shall ensure that the use of adaptive management for things other than the BGOs doesn't impair the ability of adaptive management to address the BGOs. So sorry that I thought of DEQ and I disconnected you from the BGOs.
So if someday someone says, hey, we'd like to know about the porcupine and and whether we need something around porcupine protection or whatever, then that could be a question that's given to the AMC, even though it's clearly not direct.
Or one that's closer to home, say like E. coli, right? That it could be a water quality issue that's not in BGOs.
Yeah, and in section A, I think we wanted to respond quickly outside yearly check-in. Partly thinking about things like 2020 fires that were very sudden, had a huge impact on the landscape and covered species. But also just, lawsuits happen and they get a resolution and they might have to be adjusted too quickly, especially lawsuits on federal action. Affect you a lot, but we're relying on federal actions for this program from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife and National Marine Fisheries Service. So want to be able to respond quickly if we needed monitoring info because of those. Yeah, fair enough. Okay, Stacy and then Emily.
Yeah, I think this would fall under that bucket, but hypothetically, if like a tethered logging rulemaking.
It's not hypothetical.
It's not hypothetical.
Bro.
But they're the AMC of my question. If we're coming from a BF or coming from an AMC member, this would go through that process. Would that type of nomination, for lack of a better word, be different or treated differently than another recommendation, or are they all the same, or?
Yeah, well, a tethered logging would be, because it wouldn't be outside of the HCP, because I think we would be talking about water, impacts to water would be why we would be studying that, and tethered logging fall under the HCP, I would think. And so I don't think it would have to be outside of that. It can be prioritized within the context of stuff before the AIC.
I guess just the follow-up was because you said the prioritize, and I would say that with the deputy chief, no, division chief for forest resources might say, hey, you're going to do this, and our answer may not be, we're dropping everything to do this for you. And so I just wonder, I don't know what the process then is when ODF's like, actually, we need this done.
Yeah, I think that's kind of my question, and maybe that wasn't the intent of this document. Maybe we will need to navigate that when it comes, but there's just different avenues, right? That these nominations or preliminary research projects could come through, and some we may want to prioritize more than others. Mm-hmm. Some that are, a requirement in rule, for example, to be stated by some date or HCP related. And I don't know, maybe that was intent to kind of get to that piece, but that's just the questions that come to my mind. I think this generally process makes a lot of sense. But then what do we do with actually we get a bunch of things that have sort of come in different ways, and how do we prioritize them?
Yeah, I mean, the how-to of prioritizing, that's a thing we haven't had to wrestle with yet. So, and it doesn't all look long at each other. I mean, it's probably gonna have to be a little bit of I would imagine, because each one of them are gonna have some different parameters around them, right? Some might be a higher priority for some people because they feel like there's a expediency or a real need to, move something along quickly. Others might be more of a political expediency, right? Where it's like, okay, we committed to do tethered logging rulemaking in a certain time frame, or at least start it in a certain time frame, and so that maybe bumps it up the food chain. So I don't think we have a good answer. It's just gonna have to be a little bit of an art.
This making here.
Just kind of stuff lays on the process. Emily, you were next, and then Josh.
Yeah. Just okay. Yeah. One thing to keep in mind though is like it did say that there's a certain date annually that the questions are given to IRST. So I don't know if you could move faster than that because that's like in rule, or if you need special permission from IRST or what that would look like to be.
You mean to give questions to the IRST?
Yeah, because it's saying that like
Yeah.
We shall give them the preliminary research questions annually on a date specified in the AMC charter. And so it's an annual thing. And I mean, I understand the ad hoc can say, oh, we'll do this on a yearly thing instead of biannually. So that still, makes sense in here for like new priorities, saying it can be faster than that time frame, but I don't know if it can be faster than that.
Well, they're kind of two different things. One, I would take it two bites and answer to your issue you're bringing up. These are kind of two different things. So this is prioritizing the question, not necessarily that we would hone in, we wouldn't. So for example, I could bring forward a question that I've come up with, but the group hasn't adopted that question. The group could say, I like the question, but we want to develop that a little bit more. So we're going to prioritize that to develop that question. And then we would have, we'd put that in the hopper and we'd have a big discussion around it. We'd maybe make a work group to hone it, right? And whatever, we'd go through that whole process, gyration. And then we'd prepare that question to be sent to the IRST.
Gotcha.
So
okay.
this is more of like looking at, we use the term, we switched from research topics to research question, because the rules all talk about research questions. They don't talk about research topics.
Gotcha.
And so we felt like it was probably more true to the direction in the rule to talk about questions. But I think we're not, when this process outlines a process for an individual bringing forward a research question to then be prioritized by the group. That doesn't necessarily marry the group to adopt that exact question, in my mind anyway. I think it just prioritized it as a question to be developed from the MC.
Okay.
Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that was exactly my comment. This is just how does a question get in front of the MC? Once it's in front of us, that's up to the 10 of us or voting members to discuss and make that decision. And so the result could be anything from we'll put this on the list for 4 years from now to why would you even bring that question to us, Josh? You're wasting our time. Whatever. But this is just how does the question get in front of us? It doesn't constrain us on what we do once the question.
Yeah, and before I go to Adam, one other part of responding to your point that you brought up there, Emily, that I think is important. That specific rule that you just read that talked about a date certain, Terry and I and Stacy have discussed potentially suggesting that the Board of Forestry change that rule, because it was written before we had a chance to really figure out how this works.
Yeah.
And this idea that we would come up with all the questions at the same time and dump them all on the IRST on the same date.
It's not
like, this doesn't really feel like it makes a lot of sense to do it that way. So that's not the way we've actually been moving forward. And we're probably going to need to suggest a rule change to that specific. So there'll be more discussion on that later.
If I could jump in, I was just going to mention that myself, because that thing about, because in our instructions on the laptop should be sent, it says like you get your question and you wait for the agenda to be finalized. Is that what you're talking about? It creates this built-in time lag where you're supposed to consolidate all the questions that go to IRSC, which seems impractical to me. So if you are going to bring up the problems with that,
yeah, and we can talk more about that. We could talk more about that at a future meeting where we talk about potential cleanup things that we need to work on. But in my mind, we develop a question with this directs us to help us figure out how do we bring forward new ones, right? So we're almost to the end, which is fantastic, with like the first 3 topics that were brought forward, right? Amphibians is the last one that we're working on of those 3 topics, and those were prescribed by the authors and given to us. From here, it's wide open. Right. And there's a bunch of things that we could prioritize. And so this is trying to help us figure out what's a process for doing that, so that we're not constantly considering, like, every meeting somebody brings in new topics. It's more of a sort of this is the cadence of how this will work. And there's going to be a call out for questions, and we'll develop, there'll be a little bit of homework to do prior to bringing your question forward, so that we can then discuss it as a group and understand basically what you're getting at and why this is, make your case for why this is an important question to prioritize. Then once it gets prioritized, then we would move it into the agenda for honing that question. And everybody would still get their opportunity to weigh in like we have under the last few questions. And then even from there, so like where we're sitting right now, and we have IRST developing proposals for both the roads, the package of questions we gave them, and the literature review for east side slopes. Those will then come back to us with potential proposals. We'll have decisions to make in terms of the likely cost of the different proposals they're giving us. And that's when we develop our research agenda. And we prescribe that to the board and say, we think this is the suite of things we should be investing in right now. Give us the authority to go forward and pay for this stuff. I think that's the way it's supposed to work, right? We haven't gone all the way through any of this yet. So this is, but I think so this is just like the very front end of how do questions come in. Yes, and somebody had a question. Adam.
I think tethered logging came up, and I was going to mention that in terms of the statutory deadline, March of next year is when we have to initiate rulemaking, which is different than the post disturbance harvest, which the statutory deadline was around completing the rulemaking process. So for those not tracking, I just wanted to mention that.
Thanks, Adam. And just to put a little bit more color around it, even the authors in the original PFA report directed basically, so the tethered logging has been occurring under plans for alternate practice because the rules themselves it doesn't fit perfectly. It's not ground-based and it's not cable. It's in between kind of. And there's different types of cable of tethered logging as well. And so it was decided by the authors when they were developing the PFA that they would direct a rulemaking to start and determine whether there's some BMPs or things like that could be incorporated into the rule and make it more of a streamlined process so the plan for alternate practice would not be required, sort of thing. So there's different ideas, but I think that's the general sense of what the rulemaking is, and it is required under the PFA to start, as Adam said, by November 2027. You just said it.
March of 25. So
25, that's what I meant. I meant 25.
Yeah, it was 3 years after 3 years after Senate Bill 1501 was adopted.
That's right. And so
and Adam has the language probably right in front of him, but the language in the PFA is this rulemaking may use, but does not need to use the new adaptive management process described in this report.
So we've received information from ODF that they would like to use the adaptive management program to at least start the room and do some literature review or some stuff like that. So we don't have any more information around it than that. But that's just sort of level setting for everybody to know kind of where we're at with tethered logging. It's not a formal issue before us right now, but it very well could be in the next 6 months or so.
So when we received that official request from ODF to make tethered logging the AMC's problem, is that it's initiating the rulemaking process in terms of applying the statute?
I think it would. I mean, it's really, I mean, that's a good question.
Actually has it.
Go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, and I think it would be coming from the Board of Forestry, technically, not from ODF. It's a nuanced thing, but just wanted that's what
and even presenting at the Board of Forestry meeting about it is that counts as initiation before they even decide whether or not AMC will be involved. So just FYI.
Okay.
Yeah, Emily's right. Yeah, that's us going to the board. That's counts as initiation.
So we'll learn more about that as it comes along, and if we end up the ones having to wrestle with it, we'll learn a lot about it.
Any other anything on section A or B that you want to discuss farther, any changes before we move on to C? All right, I'm gonna assume that is the case. Move on to section C. Oh, good, just fits. And we will be taking a break at 3 for 10 minutes.
So these questions, you know, my hope is that when we do get around to doing this process and we start putting our just some you know, I have a lot of trust that the folks around this table will hone in on, first of all, sort of, you know, what are the priorities that you have, right? Instead of just here's everything that I have, I'm just gonna dump it. More of like, okay, of these that I have, or of these questions I have, which ones do I think, or we think as an organization, you know, you're representing as a group. And so you would bring forward sort of your hot topic that you think is important and make the case for that. And then this group would then discuss amongst those, what are the things, right? Because I think we can easily become overwhelmed with a bunch of things. And to your point, Stacy, how do you really parse out which ones are priorities over others when there's not a lot to say that, well, that thing is way more important than that thing. So I think we'll lean on each other's sort of good nature to be able to make sure that we are not flooding each other with a bunch of stuff that we then have to, you know, really spend a ton of time wrestling over, and B, give some grace to each other when your thing might not be the thing that rises to the very top. And so I think it's important. This is not a one and done. And so there's a lot of opportunity to, and just as I will go back to Josh bringing forward some ideas in the beginning, and they didn't get chosen, and I appreciate that Josh didn't walk away and, you know, take his ball and go home. But that we were able to sort of focus in on the priorities that the group did vote on and make good progress there. So and I have confidence that this group will do that. I just wanted to say that.
Well, with that, 10-minute break, and we'll come back and we'll see you again. And yeah, so we'll see you guys in a bit.
Well, it's just one of those things. I don't think, honestly, you know, I can't speak to it's great.
All right, we're back.
Yeah. Speaking of the I end up like bringing it all.
Okay, my homework's done.
Okay, let's back to.
This can kill me. Yeah.
Okay.
So much.
So back to section C. Any changes? Let you look at it one more time.
I guess one thing is that we're maybe a caution is the timeline and kind of like when this might happen. Because if an EMC board or an EMC member has their 500 word, like here's why we should do this. I mean, I can see, say the Board of Forestry has their 500 word thing that comes to us. We're obviously going to be like, yeah, let's have this background information pulled together. But if one of us is doing it, it seems maybe premature to go through all of this work. You know what I mean?
My understanding is that this will inform the discussion for us. So this won't be done. C won't, the list of, you know, A to G is not all inclusive, and it's also not a list that each one of those has to be hit. It's a such as list.
Okay.
So that's first of all. Second of all, my understanding is this information is to inform the discussion around around prioritizing, right? So these won't be individually created for each proposed research question. This will be more of, okay, we're having our meeting to discuss priorities. ODF, gather the situational information for us so that we can be informed when we get into that meeting about what is our space to decide here. And how many of these things should we pick off to prioritize?
Okay, I think I understand.
Yeah. Wendy.
I just have a technical thing in little a under C. They've sent communication with the AMPC member who proposed the question. Or it could be, because it could be, say, coming from the Board of Forestry or whatever. So it could be just be something based on communication with the AMPC member or other proposer of the question.
Other entity. That sound good?
So that'd be like Board of Forestry.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, my understanding is the questions will come in and then ODF will prepare this sort of information for us to have the discussion. Right?
And is this at the, sorry, just like the once a year?
Going back up to, I think that's an A, right?
I think it's actually by, it looks, I remember it said like, let's see, fourth quarter of odd years.
So every other year.
Yeah, unless it's like, you know, something big. As
Does that match the stuff in the statute timelines and kind of? I'm assuming we wanted that to dovetail with the timing of the presentation of the agenda.
Yeah.
Because it says the AMPC will send that research agenda to the board no later than 15th of odd numbers year. Does that work together, right?
I don't think this will work together with that. This will be so remember, this will be in advance, right? So like take 2025, for example, the research agenda that we'll be bringing to them will be the questions that we just have gone through, that have gone through the full process. This won't, I don't think, you know, depending on the number of questions we get and we prioritize, maybe we pick 3 out of the group of, you know, 7 questions or something. Then we'll have to spend time on each one of those questions, honing in on the actual question, delivering it to the IRST. They'll come back with, you know, all of the back and forth that occurs, and then they'll develop a proposal that we'll choose, and then we'll bring those forward, some group of those forward to add the agenda for the Board of Forestry. So I think maybe those are actually two distinct and different things. I don't think they have to coincide. Although I could be, correct me if you other people see it differently.
It gives an awful lot of time between, because in odd numbered years, in August, we'll present our research agenda to the Board of Forestry, and then in fourth quarter of that same year, we'll consider proposed preliminary research questions. So it gives us a lot of lead time.
Yeah,
but
so you're probably right. It doesn't have to match up, but it can definitely. Whatever we prioritize will be the ones, some subset of that anyway, at least, will be the ones that we bring forward for the research agenda. Right?
I think perhaps we should just leave it the way it is, and then if it turns out to be cumbersome, we just change it. It's easy to change this, right? There's a lot of these things are, we will find out as we do it, what we're most comfortable.
Yeah.
And just to add to that, I mean, it's probably good that it's not like right next to us. We have a research agenda and everything. It'll be nice to have things spread out a bit. And I mean, there's already the precedence for submitting soon the proposed questions sooner for up there. So it doesn't have to necessarily be in that fourth quarter. That's just give some structure. So
and go back up to A or B, sorry. So 6 weeks before that meeting, so say we schedule that meeting for the December meeting. So 6 weeks before that, ODF will tell everybody, hey, start gearing up, get your questions ready, because the meeting in December is going to be our meeting where we talk about priority questions and questions. So that gives everybody an opportunity to start, gathering everything in B that you would need. And then getting that to ODF, and then ODF would then be preparing, simultaneously be preparing everything under C, and then also adding some things once they see the questions come in. And then that will help inform that meeting. That's the idea.
So are we getting to the point where we should be making that decision about what that date is? About when we want to have our first call for questions?
It's an odd years,
right? It's odd years till the end of next year. Do we want to do one before then? We want to do practice run. We want to do a small run. Do we want to do, because I don't know. I mean, Josh came up with a couple questions as we were debating with the first three that were there in statute, and they were great questions. And so, you may remember I vectored for some of those. So that I'm just wondering. We get done with we have this amphibian question to work on. But could we be getting ready to work on another one in the early part of 25 instead of waiting until the end of 25 to call for it? Could we at least start thinking about it and getting it ready now? Because it is an odd year. I mean, today is an even year, but it's not tomorrow. Tomorrow is an odd year.
Tomorrow's another day.
Well, yeah. I just, as I'm reading a recession, as I'm writing legislation today, it is. I'm thinking of the next session.
Yeah.
And that is 25. Tomorrow.
I mean,
just not today, but just know that maybe we should set some time aside for what the process is for submitting. It says, 500 pages, says what the biological goals are. I mean, it gives us some guidance about what's there, but it's going to take a while to get that ready, I think.
Well, and I would say along those lines, inevitably, this process is going to have holes, right? Meaning that there'll be things that we didn't think of. Thank you. That don't fit nicely into here. And for example, the tethered locking one, right, that we just talked about. It could very well be that ODF comes to us or the board directs us in November and says, hey, here's
anything else
you need to work on this. And then it's not an odd year. And yet, if we found time on our agendas in the next month following that, we would bring that up and discuss it and start moving them all down the road. So I think that this isn't to Wendy's point, this isn't going to be perfect. We're just going to have to sort of feel our way through. I think this is probably a good place to document what our general practice is going to be, but I think they'll definitely be outlined, but we'll have to figure out it. We need to adjust it. Definitely not written in stone.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna the effectiveness monitoring one too is in that mix, and I do think that will probably take some bandwidth.
Yeah.
So I like the idea.
They're coming to us.
Well, they may be.
Yeah.
Yeah, kind of navigating that. I think given that context, this is a really useful framework, and as long as we can be flexible with it and know if we need to change it, we can. There's going to be something going to fit as neatly into this.
There's another one too that we talked about briefly, but the west side slopes question. there's a west side slopes question that's actually part of the draft HCP. We brought it up briefly before this group. That's another one that's gonna be basically prescribed to us by the HCP. So.
And in that case, I'm just thinking about, it's basically the Board of Forestry then, when it comes to the HDP, wouldn't that be accurate?
Sort of, I mean, to the extent that this entity is here to support not just the Board of Forestry, but also the HCP itself, I think that, you know, inevitably gives the author some authority.
Yeah.
To prescribe some things, which already has happened, right? That's why we have the 3 priority topics in front of us. And so that won't last forever. We have the ACP at some point will be a done document. And we're trying to build this ship so that we can live past that point. But there will be some things that we definitely have to respond to because the HCP requires us. Whether that's the Board of Forestry's authority or just the authority of the HCP that's held by the Department of Forestry. I mean, you could argue either way. You could also say it's the legislature's authority that's directing those things because the legislature is the one that said go forth and build an HCP. Go ahead, Josh.
So a couple things. One is to Will's point, I think and Stacy actually the effectiveness monitoring work that we're starting on. The questions I proposed last year that Will so kindly supported me on. We're basically effectiveness monitoring questions. So I do think we're getting there by starting to put together effectiveness monitoring for that as kind of a general program that would then address specific questions like riparian effectiveness for water quality, for habitat, effectiveness, which I think gets me to my question. Or so you just mentioned the west side slopes question. Could you elaborate a little bit on that? Because if this isn't the first time I've heard of it, I don't remember the first time I heard.
Yeah, so there's a specific question that looks at and Stacy, you might remember better than could probably articulate better than I can.
Probably slow it up.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, would like to break down, so don't take this as totally solid, but basically looking at using the adaptive management process to review particularly steep slopes model with some field component that I'm forgetting exactly.
Yeah, that was the gist.
Yeah, basically like another place of directing AMC to look at this key issue.
The accuracy of the model used.
Essentially, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so can we move on from C? I just want to make sure that we're good on this so far with the framework. No questions on the specific targets, so we could just keep going. It would be really great if we could get through it, but so there's a lot going on.
Given all you said, Commissioner, given the work that we have that's going to be prescribed to us either by the Board of Forestry or by the HCP or stuff that we've already committed to doing, like the effectiveness monitoring, I think we definitely have more work in front of us that will, dovetail nicely in the next year. And it seems to me like we could probably wait to enact this process until the end of 2025, just like it says, and then bring up some other questions. We'll have plenty to work on through next year with those other questions and topics that are coming at us through the HCP and the board. So, are there any other?
Are you saying you would rather not vote on this today?
Oh, no. I'm just saying, because Will had suggested that we do an early run of this process. And I'm basically saying, I don't think that'll be necessary. I think we'll have plenty of work through the winter and summer. And we'll be getting stuff back too. Remember that. We'll be getting stuff back on roads. We'll be getting stuff back on east side stuff and hopefully on amphibians if we can get them a question in time. Towards the end of next year, we'll be starting on mid next year, maybe we're starting to see something coming back on amphibians. And we'll have things to address and work on there as far as priorities and hopefully starting to fund some research. So there'll be definitely work to do, and that'll put us in a nice place to where next year, when we're sitting here about this time next year, we'll be scoping out, you know, when are we hitting that 6-week time to get to our prioritizing next questions. So are we ready to vote, or do people have any other?
We do have a table at the very end, just for a quick review. I'm not sure how much you guys want to discuss it. It looks like it's mostly just going through the life cycle of the questions in general. But how that feeds into this framework that's proposed above.
I think that was just an FYI. Someone let you know. Big steps for it. Is that your recollection?
Yeah. And I have some hesitancy about having us be part of our governing charter.
Yeah.
I think if we could put something like for current reference subject to revision or what, because I would not like this to be restricting us. I think to conceptualize what we're actually going to be doing is useful, but I would rather not have a governing document of the committee.
I agree with that, Wendy.
We can continue to keep this up here and just change the date for when it was last discussed.
No, I
I
think
mean the appendix
what
one.
Wendy is saying.
I like the whole thing and I'm ready to vote on it, but the appendix one, I just think is a summary of rules, which I think always is confusing because they're never completely accurate and it's more useful as guidelines, but I wouldn't like it to be part of our charter as a governing document.
I agree with that.
So
I think that Wendy's proposal would be to just vote on the process and remove the appendix from the process. Don't delete it. If it's useful as a guide, then keep it somewhere, but don't make it part of the charter and part of the decision that we're voting on today.
Yeah, trying to see if there's a reference to appendix one in the text of the.
I honestly don't remember spending much.
No, it doesn't.
Remember it all on the appendix. I think that was Terry's effort to, you know, which is a good one. But I was just trying to make sure he got it down.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll delete it from this document, but I can have it just like it will be saved somewhere else because there's other versions of this document. I even changed which ones, so we'll still have access to that appendix if it's really needed. But
Commissioner Tucker, you had something you wanted to.
Well, the only thing I was going to add was to the appendix.
Oh.
The only thing I felt like I could contribute anything as a layperson is the fact that part of the report was in fact important to be translated to lay phraseology, to an easy readable document. And that's not listed there as a.
Maybe we could put this as just like a guide, some sort of a guide for AMC
flow of AMC
research process or something like that.
I think would be sort of handy to leave it at the end, but just say, for reference only, just as a guide, but not part of the charter or something like that. What do you think, Will?
It's perfect. To me, I looked at this and thought it was actually flowed pretty well. I liked this document, but again, I agree with you that this is what's in the statute.
Yeah. And the only hesitancy I would have is that I didn't spend much time at all on the appendix. And so I haven't done my due diligence to make sure that for my own purposes,
today's motion should be
that's correct. So
I had read it and I just had a question about it. What's the authority for this and stuff like that? That's one reason, because I didn't have time to go back and read.
So the fact that you read it and had those questions also makes me sort of hesitant to have it in the charter. Okay. I absolutely, if it's a useful tool, and I think it would be a useful tool. I'd rather have it not be in the charter, I guess. I would rather have it just be a guide.
I can make a suggestion, like, if you're like finalizing the document, Emily, I would suggest that just instead of calling it appendix 1, just put something like in all caps. The following is for reference only and will be revised over time or something like that.
My desire to get consensus, you just said that you would like to have it left out because you hadn't had a chance to study and reference stuff. So if we're gonna move forward, because the agenda calls for a substantial vote, yeah, substantial decision. And so.
I'm comfortable with that language up there. I don't wanna make it sound as if I'm absolutely against. In order for me to feel comfortable about something that's prescribing the way the rule works, I feel like I should have a better read through it to make sure my reference to the rule matches what's written on the page. And I didn't do that work. So maybe I'm
fine with leaving it off too. Either way, we're good.
I would suggest we leave it off now because I need to go back and reread what it said in the rule about translation into lay words.
If you guys are comfortable leaving it off, then I would be more comfortable leaving it off. And like I said, I'm not opposed to having a guide like this, and maybe, you know, I can go back and spend more time on it to double check myself, and others can do the same, and then we could, you know, talk about next time having this be an official guide or something of that nature.
Okay, so I just keep the way it is for now. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I think the consensus sounds like people are okay with taking it off.
Oh, still deleting it.
Yeah, just deleting it from the document. Sorry, we're
no, it's
we're
okay.
joking all sorts of ways.
Sure that I'm understanding, you know.
It's a helpful thing, but it's, I think for this, we should share with both.
So Emily, what's the proper title for that version you have now? We had draft 2, draft 3, which was really draft 2 with comments. What is this version you're calling now? Can we put final?
Should we?
You don't need to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could get rid of draft, but when I save it, I should probably put like.
And I think that let's see where the consensus go. So I'd move that we accept the research question process as worked on the board today.
Okay, second.
Real quick, just to I'm sorry, I just want to make sure. So I can delete the comments that are on this document and accept all changes. And that's what we are voting on, is that version.
Yeah,
that's what I did myself to get the version I can work with.
Delete the appendix, delete the comments, and accept all changes.
Okay, it's being slow on
that's what's in front of us. And I think that's what you just moved.
Yeah.
Yes.
The motion that accepted as an additional charter is.
Yes. Yes, I believe so.
For clarification, then I'd add the words adopt into our charter. Is there a second though?
Don't worry, I've saved it before like this. We only made like one meeting.
We have a second to that motion. Josh seconded. Yeah. Any discussion while we're waiting for the computer to stop freaking out?
Escape from the.
Now you're in the.
It's okay. I think there was the only one change the whole thing, so.
Yeah, if you don't meet everybody here.
I know.
I apologize, the computer is freaking out.
All right, looks like people are down here. I'll just reopen it. Okay, let's see.
Well, in the meantime, do we have any discussion on the motion that was made? And to reiterate, the motion is to move to accept all changes, remove the comments, remove the appendix, and then adopt this research question process into our charter. That was moved and seconded. If there's no discussion, Emily, you want to call the question? You want to do the roll?
Yeah, let's do it. Okay. All right, so we don't need any fingers for this. Don't want to do a finger check.
I don't think so.
All right, so Seth Barnes,
Aye.
David Bunny,
Yes.
Stacy Detweiler. Aye. Julie Furman. Aye. Wendy Gerlach. Aye. Kim Kratz.
Oh,
Wait, no, he's no, never
voting.
mind. He's a non-voting, my bad. I was just going through. Casey Kula.
Aye.
Jason Robeson.
Aye.
Josh Seeds.
Aye.
Rex Storm as subbing in for Amanda Sullivan Oster.
Yes.
And I'm sorry I said Julie Furman instead of your name, Courtney, but you are the proxy for Julie Furman. I just want to clarify.
With it, you know.
Thank you. And then William Tucker. All right.
All right, passed unanimously, thank you. And so, Emily, go ahead and make that, do those changes and add it to the charter, and we will, look forward to this process at the end of next year.
So, yeah, I'll just get rid of the comments. That's all that's left to do. So I'll do it afterwards once I'm not breaking out. But we all know there won't be comments, and I will abut it to the charter and send it out to you all once I've done that.
Okay.
Awesome.
And do send out the appendix for us to work on.
Yes.
And that could be a helpful guide. So maybe send that out as a separate document, and perhaps at the next meeting, we can discuss that. It shouldn't take us too long. And if people feel like it's helpful, then we can include it maybe on our website somewhere as just a helpful guide.
Okay.
Okay, what's next? I think we're getting ready to wrap up, right?
Yeah, that was the last big thing on the agenda.
So our next meeting is our field trip, and we don't have a date for it yet, so we will get that date out as soon as we have it.
Yeah, and it sounds like.
I was gonna say, I think I got something.
Yeah, we did, at least from Dr. Garcia, it looks like she's asking Chris, but looks like the first week of October and the week of October 20th are no-goes for Dr. Garcia, and we're just waiting on her PhD student, so.
The 15th through the 18th.
Yeah.
The week of the 15th through the 18th.
That is a week that is.
Well, there's also, there's another. Well, I'm gonna put every day that's not in that time frame that works for Chris as well, and then because we also have the first week of October, it's like ends on the 4th, so we can have the 7th or the 11th as well as options. So I'll just make sure. Yeah, or
Which ones did you just say?
7th.
October 7th through the 11th?
Or yeah, there's a bunch right now, but we won't know until Chris gets back to us too, because he's gonna be part of that, and it's his sites I think that we'd be going to. So it's important that he's there.
Okay. Yeah, I would second what Josh just said with regards to the week of the 15th or this 14th through the 18th. That's a rough week.
Okay.
That's OFIC has our annual meeting that week, so I don't know, that's just what, but we all usually attends that, as does some others, and so and then that's also the Board of Forestry retreat on the 16th and 17th, which makes that an exceptionally difficult week for a lot of people. So
yeah, I'll make sure to not put that as an option then if it's something that a lot of people are gonna have trouble making. But we'll just see what everyone can do. I'll send out a doodle poll with all the days that outside of that time frame and outside the ones Dr. Garcia and Chris can't do.
yeah,
hopefully we'll get it on the books soon.
yeah, I'm sure we will.
Yeah, but I'll definitely get on it as soon as we have that date. Anyhow, okay. Any other business you all would like to discuss before we adjourn?
Have a good rest of the summer. It's fading fast.
The 90s this weekend, so.
All right, we're adjourned. Thanks.
See ya.
Seeing everyone.
Yeah, good to have you in this board. Sorry.
Stop it.